Good morning and welcome to the ISO Board of Governors General Session meeting. Please note that all audience audio connections will be muted until the public comment portions of the call. We will give you instructions on how to enter the queue at that time. With that, I'll turn the call over to ISO Board of Governors Chair Jan Scory. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome to Transmission Day at the ISO. If you've taken a look at our agenda today, you know that we have a number of substantive issues that we will be tackling. I want to thank you all for joining us. It should be a very interesting session. And with that, let's get going. I'll turn it over to Roger for the roll call.
Thank you, Governor Shorey, and we'll start with you. Chair Shorey?
Here.
Vice Chair Bornstein?
Here.
Governor Edo?
Here.
Governor Galitova?
Here.
And Governor Leslie?
Here.
Thank you, governors. All present and accounted for. We have a quorum. We may move forward.
Great. Our next agenda item is when we allow the opportunity for general public comment. So if there's anyone who would like to offer a general public comment, I do think we received a letter. So Roger, I'll turn it back over to you to describe the letter and formally submit it for the record.
Yes. Yeah, for the record, we did receive one general public comment letter from a gentleman, Richard Harkness, regarding remote residential solar and a white paper on that subject. That has been provided to the board and posted to the website. It's my understanding that he was going to also seek to speak this morning, but I'm not sure if he's on the line or not. So Tegan, can you check and see if we have Mr. Harkness or any other folks on the line that would like to do general public comment?
We do have Mr. Harkness on the line. I'm going to go ahead and ask him to unmute. A pop-up should appear. Please accept the pop-up to be unmuted.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
I'll do that. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, let's make sure people mute because we're getting some background echo.
Okay, let me hang up my telephone because they both are going. Can you still hear me okay? I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Yes, we hear you well now. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Yes, I'm on the screen now. Okay, yes, I'm ready when you're ready for me to give my remark.
We are ready.
Okay, thank you. My name is Rich Harkness. I'm the author of a white paper on remote solar that I hope you've had a chance to look at. I'll explain why it seems relevant and timely to Cal ISO shortly. By way of background, I'm retired from doing new business and strategic planning at Stanford Research Institute, IBM, and Boeing. I've written a book about global warming. Last year, I wrote a paper showing that utility scale solar is about 6 times more cost effective than rooftop solar per unit of power produced. That fact isn't in the literature, and I think very few know the difference is so large. To take advantage of it, I analyzed a scenario where homeowners could purchase solar panels and battery storage in utility scale solar farms and export that energy into the grid to offset the energy used at home, the grid energy used at home. The homeowner would just pay for transmission and distribution. It took about 6 months to get the data and construct a financial model, but the results are dramatic. I estimated that a remote solar system capable of generating as much power as the average California home uses each year would only cost about $4,200, pay back in 3.3 years, and have an ROI of about 30%. And about half of that $4,200 is for the battery. I suspect many folks would voluntarily invest some of their savings in something that gets a 30% ROI. So remote solar could be a way to reduce electric bills while significantly and painlessly increasing the funding for solar. So why do I think this is especially relevant to Cal ISO at this point? You have identified the so-called duck curve problem, and my white paper shows how remote solar could help mitigate it. It does this because the Public Utility Commission could require remote solar to include battery storage. And at $4,200, the combined package of array plus battery would still be a very attractive investment. In conclusion, I hope that Cal ISO will do 2 things. First, to ask your technical folks to carefully review my white paper and see if they agree with my analysis. Second, the PUC is currently making rules for community solar, and remote solar may fit under that umbrella, although it's very different in how the homeowner is compensated. Remote solar envisions that the homeowner owning the power and just paying the utility to transport it, whereas community solar apparently requires the homeowner to sell his power to the utility, who then credits his electric bill for it, perhaps on the basis of avoided costs. I suspect remote solar would be cheaper, gain wider acceptance, save more greenhouse gas, and better mitigate the duck curve problem, but we don't have the data. Therefore, CAISO might request that the Public Utility Commission determine the capital costs and ROI for community solar so the costs can be compared. And CAISO might also suggest that the Public Utility Commission consider including remote solar in their current rulemaking. I thank you very much for your consideration. I realize I've been reading very, very rapidly to try to get in under your time limit, and that's always difficult. But I would very much appreciate your comments on this idea. Thank you very much for your consideration again. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Harkness. We appreciate your succinct and very informative presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Harkness. We will take your suggestions under advisement. I'll refer this to the staff for their analysis. I did get a chance to look at your paper, and I'm generally familiar with community solar because we have it in Sacramento where I live. And so the point you're making is a distinction that could be an important one to consumers. I do think that the general umbrella that this falls under is probably more the Public Utilities Commission, as you have just suggested, but we'll take a look at it, and we thank you for your comments today and for the paper that you've presented. So with that, did any other board members have any comments or questions? Sorry, I forgot to look.
I see none.
Okay, good. Then let's go ahead and see if anyone else has a general public comment. So items which are not on the agenda today. Tegan, could you check for us?
Absolutely. If you would like to make a comment at this time, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You will receive a pop-up notification when it is your turn to speak. Please accept that pop-up notification to be unmuted. At which point, please state your name, the company you represent, and your comment. If you are joining us via phone only, you can dial #2 to enter the queue. All right, I am not showing any hands raised at this time. I'll turn it back to you.
All right, good. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Harkness. On to agenda item 2, which is just the minutes. So if I could turn it back over to you, Roger.
Never just the minutes. See, that's my important.
Very important record we're keeping here.
Exactly. And if I can have a motion for approval of the March 20th, 2024 general session minutes for the ISO board.
So moved, Roger.
Thank you, Mary. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Joe. Chair Shorey, your vote.
Aye.
Governor Bornstein.
Aye.
Governor Edo.
Aye.
Governor Glitova.
Aye.
And Governor Leslie.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes. And let me turn it back to you, Chair Shorey.
Thank you very much. At this point on our agenda, it is time for our CEO report from our CEO, Elliot Mainzer. Elliot.
Thank you very much, Chair Shorey and Vice Chair Bornstein and governors. It's great to see you all. I wanted just to offer for my CEO report today a few comments that really tie into the very transformational changes that are impacting our industry, as well as the transformational changes that are underway here at the ISO. I think this week, particularly meetings yesterday and today, are very consequential. I wanted just to highlight a few items. First of all, as you all know, reliability is always job number one for us here at the ISO. And I think, as you saw in my CEO report, going into summer of 2024 this year, meeting the 1 in 10 loss of load expectation for our footprint is just a very, very important development. This is reflective of an incredible amount of work by our regulatory authorities in California, industry, resource developers, and of course, the CAISO staff. But having been able to onboard over 15,000 megawatts of additional resources over the last 3 years, to work hard on the resource adequacy rules, to strengthen our analytics, to improve our voice, and to basically to be able to establish that amount of new generation, and to be able to approach the summer with greater confidence, certainly recognizing that there remain risks, but to be able to bring about this amount of change in a relatively short order of time, and to be able to meet that 1 in 10 LOLE expectation. It's just a really foundational development for us within the footprint. Wanted to highlight that. Of course, yesterday, as we saw in the dialogue around raising the bid cap for storage and hydro resources, I think it was an extremely important conversation. As you know, we now have over 8,500 megawatts of 4-hour lithium-ion batteries operating within our grid. That's the highest concentration in the United States. And as you know, it's come on very rapidly. I think yesterday's conversation was reflective of several things. First of all, our willingness to learn and continue to listen very carefully to our stakeholders, and to make sure that we can align our market rules with the reliability needs of the grid. And as we listen, to be able to respond and to adapt as necessary, particularly with very, very difficult set of issues that require a lot of attention, and also reinstate our continued commitment to evolving and adapting as we learn as these new resources come onto our system. Very important. I just wanted to again thank everyone for their engagement in that stakeholder process, and to all the staff who I think responded so effectively. As we turn our attention today, as Chair Shorey mentioned, to some of the transmission issues, as you know, this is another one of our extremely important responsibilities within California. And as we seek to onboard over 7,000 megawatts per year of new generation for the next couple of decades, to keep the state online with SB 100, and to do so in a reliable and affordable fashion, our work on transmission, in particular our coordination with the state agencies, with the utilities, other local regulatory authorities, to come up with a much more comprehensive and aligned set of gearing and mechanisms to ensure that resource planning, transmission planning, interconnection queuing, and procurement are aligned, and then to come back with transmission plans that are aligned with our 20-year view, but also each 10-year segment, and to come forward, staying ahead of the curve, developing our zonal approach, and being able to come back with what we consider to be a least cost approach to meeting California's energy needs is very, very important. So we're looking forward to the conversation today about the 2023-2024 transmission plan, and really appreciate all the work that's gone into that. And of course, as we take our first major steps into offshore wind development in California, we continue to be very sensitive to the timing and sequencing and affordability issues that are implicated by that development. Of course, today, we're also going to have, I think, a very, very important session around our interconnection process enhancements. Of course, you'll be hearing more from Neil Miller and from Danielle Mills. But of course, this effort, to me, is really emblematic of the improvements and the changes that we've made in our stakeholder process. This is an incredibly important issue. We all recognize that we need transformational change in the area of interconnection queue reform, and we have to be able to make sure we get the best projects online and operating on our system in accordance with our transmission plans. And I wanted to thank the very many people and stakeholders who participated in that process, who helped us from the outset to define the problem statement and the range of alternatives. And I think today, consistent with that commitment to stakeholder engagement, we have an opportunity to hear from the wide array of voices who've participated in that stakeholder process, and to hear from staff how we have attempted to fit a line through those different perspectives and come out with a proposal that we think is up to the task of the changes that are necessary to be able to onboard resources efficiently. So I'm really looking forward to hearing those different perspectives today. And then finally, when we think about the SPTO conversation that we'll be having later today with Pattern and the SunZia line, as you know, we are both focused very heavily on the work within California, inside the state and offshore, but also doing what we can to develop innovative approaches to transmission expansion, innovative approaches to development, to cost allocation, and strengthening the interconnectivity of the Western transmission grid. We know that this is absolutely essential access the additional resources that are going to be needed for load service here in California and in other states, to promote multi-sectoral partnerships, and at the end of the day, to reinforce the amazing grid that we have in the Western United States that we know is going to be the physical underlying of a strong extended day-ahead market as we move into the future. So I'm really looking forward to the conversations today. Deeply appreciative of all the work of our stakeholders, deeply appreciative of the work of our staff who've worked tirelessly on each of these proposals, and looking forward to a really successful meeting today. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Elliot. Do any of the board members have any questions for Elliot at this point? Okay, well, thank you very much then.
Thank
and
you.
We'll move on to the next item, which is our report from the WEIM governing body, which will be given by the chair, Andy Campbell. Andy, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again, Chair Shorey, Vice Chair Bornstein, and governors. Thank you for inviting me to share updates on the Western EIM governing body's general session meeting on May 20th, 2 days ago. First, we heard Elliot's CEO report, and then Haley Williamson, chair of the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada and chair of the body of state regulators, reported on their activities. And this included state commissioners attending the Western Electricity Markets Training Forum, education being a big focus and value of what the BOSSR is doing. Then the Regional Issues Forum Chair Meg McNall, partner with Thomas Coburn, who represents the 6 cities, provided an update. The RIF recently released their Policy Roadmap Roundtable report that consolidates stakeholder input to the ISO staff on policy priorities. This is the first time they've done this. RIF will be holding an in-person meeting in Boise on June 20th, just before the EIM governing body's general session meeting in Boise that same day. There will be a virtual participation available at the RIF meeting also. Guillermo Bautista Alderete presented the first quarter benefits report for the EIM, $436 million in estimated benefits during the quarter. He also described how 6 EIM balancing areas opted into the Assistance Energy Transfer Program in January. So it's interesting to see that laid out. And then we heard from governing body market expert, Dr. Susan Pope, on the soft offer cap. This is the policy we approved yesterday. And finally, Becky Robinson, Director of Market Policy Development, provided an update on policy initiatives. So this concludes my report, and I wish you a good transmission day.
Thanks very much. Does anybody have any questions for Andy before we let him escape? Or not, as you're welcome to stay. All right, good. Well, thank you very much, Andy. I appreciate it. And also, thank you so much for all the work the governing body has done to reinvigorate the RIF. I was very impressed with the report that they gave us, and I'm glad to hear about the planned activities in June. So we'll look forward to continue to getting their excellent input, which is now being done in a much more structured fashion, and to be frank, is easier for us to incorporate and think about as we move forward. So thanks for all the work that's being done on that.
Agreed. Thank you.
All right, with that, we are on to the transmission plan. And it is time for Neil Miller, who is our Vice President of Infrastructure and Operations Planning, to give us a short overview. Although I see Jeff's name on the slide, so maybe it's Jeff.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Shorey. It is Neil Miller here. First, I will be, good morning, everyone. I will be introducing and asking Jeff Billington, our Director of Transmission Infrastructure Planning, to present the 23-24 transmission plan for your approval today. But before turning the microphone over to Jeff, I did want to make a few comments. First, I wanted to thank Jeff and his team for the outstanding effort that went into the development of this year's transmission plan. I also wanted to thank the CPUC, the Energy Commission, our transmission owners, and our stakeholders for their efforts and support in getting to today, and working to address the state's reliability and policy needs in the most cost-effective and efficient way possible. I also wanted to highlight 2 key features of this year's transmission plan. First, the plan does build on last year's transmission plan that totaled $8.1 billion in new investment, and reflects the continuation of the proactive and strategic approach in studying and recommending new transmission infrastructure needed to reliably and efficiently meet California's clean energy objectives over the next decade. Developed in close collaboration with the CPUC and the Energy Commission, and reflecting input from load-serving entities and other stakeholders, this year's Plan and U approach continues to synchronize power and transmission planning, interconnection queuing, and resource procurement. Second, a significant amount of the development in this year's plan targets enabling North Coast offshore wind. As Jeff will explain, we do appreciate stakeholder concerns with the inherent uncertainties associated with the scale and scope of the envisioned development. The team have crafted a plan that prudently meets the renewable policy goals established in the renewable portfolios developed by the CPUC, provides flexibility for expansion to meet increased needs, and also enables ongoing oversight of expenditures given the lengthy siting and permitting activities expected before major construction costs are incurred. Given the time it is expected to take to site and permit this transmission, our transmission activities must start now to ensure transmission is not a critical path item in the future, and it will be monitored to match the pace of resource development as necessary. These steps continue to reflect our sensitivity to the issue of costs and the need to maintain reliability and achieve state energy goals cost effectively. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to present the 23-24 transmission plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. And good morning, Chair Shorey and members of the board. As indicated by Neil, I'll be presenting the decision item on the ISO's 2023-2024 transmission plan. If you go to the next slide. So the presentation here is being presented for the approval of the annual transmission plan. The acceleration of new resource requirements to meet the state's policy goals, particularly, as Neil indicated, the inclusion of offshore wind in the North Coast area in the CPUC's base portfolio, and increasing pace of load growth are the drivers of the capital costs within this year's transmission plan. The ISO is always focused on costs, with the recommendations being based on long-term effectiveness and efficiency of solutions. Next slide, please. The 2022-2023 transmission plan continues to apply the focused zonal approach to resource development to address rapidly escalating need for new resources. The strategic direction for the transformational change has been established in the Memorandum of Understanding signed by the California Public Utilities Commission, California Energy Commission, and the California ISO in December of 2022. And that Memorandum of Understanding tightens the linkages between resource and transmission planning, procurement direction, and the ISO's interconnection process. It also creates a formal linkage between the California Energy Commission's SB 100 and IPER activities and the ISO and the California Public Utility Commission processes. And it reaffirms the existing state agency coordination and the single forecast set coordination that is undertaken. Next slide, please. The climate change goals continue to drive the load forecast that can be seen in this graph. The CEC's load forecasts are utilized by both the California Public Utilities Commission in their integrated resource planning and the ISO's transmission planning process as a part of the single forecast set, with the applicable weather event forecast used for the specific studies as indicated. The ISO has utilized the CEC's 2022 IPER update forecast, which is the top yellow line on the graph in the 2023-2024 transmission planning process. Thanks. The climate change goals and load forecasts also has led to unprecedented resource needs. The base portfolio for this year's transmission planning cycle has about 85 gigawatts of new resources by 2035, as reflected on the graph on the left. The center bar represents the resource portfolio from the May 2022 20-year transmission outlook for the year 2040, while the last bar indicates the portfolio being used for the update of the 20-year transmission plan or 20-year transmission outlook in the year 2045 that is currently under development. This puts the resource portfolios we are planning the transmission system to on the trajectory to meet the state's goals as reflected in the from this year's portfolio to the 20-year outlook in 2045. Next slide, please. As indicated in the 2023-2024 transmission plan continues to use the zonal approach to plan the transmission for resources identified in the portfolio to clearly enable direction and prioritization of the resource interconnection and procurement process. The diagram on the left is from the May 2022 ISO 20-year transmission outlook that we're currently underway of updating. The diagram on the right identifies the interconnection zones with the capacity of resources in the portfolios for each of the zones that the ISO is planning the transmission system to reliably interconnect the resources and be deliverable to the loads in the ISO grid. Next slide, please. The analysis of the transmission planning process is conducted in a sequential manner, starting with the reliability assessment to identify any reliability-driven needs. Then the policy assessment to identify any policy-driven project needs, taking into consideration the reliability needs, and then the economic assessment to identify any market efficiency needs, again, taking into consideration the policy and reliability needs in a multi-value approach. In addition, we conduct every 2 years a 10-year local capacity study. This was not undertaken in this planning cycle and will be conducted in the next planning cycle. And the interconnection or the interregional transmission process is a 2-year process and is conducted with the other planning regions, Northern Grid and WestConnect, for consideration of interregional project proposals as potential solutions to regional needs. In this year's planning cycle, we're in year 2 of that process, and there were no projects identified in year 1 to be brought into this cycle. Next slide, please. The reliability assessment has identified, there we go. The reliability assessment has identified 19 reliability projects driven by load growth and the evolving grid conditions as the generation fleet transitions to increased renewable generation that management is recommending for approval. The estimated cost of the 19 reliability-driven projects is $1.54 billion. None of the reliability projects are eligible for competitive solicitation, as all of the upgrades are to existing system or less than 200 kV. Next slide, please. There is one previously approved project on hold from the previous planning cycles. That's the Moraga-Sobrante 115 kV line conductoring project, and that is recommended to remain on hold still in this cycle. In addition, the ISO also is continuing work to refine the recommendations regarding 3 reliability-driven projects. That would be the Oakland area reinforcement project, the short circuit mitigation for Imperial Valley 230 kV circuit breakers, and the short circuit mitigation for Miguel 230 kV short circuit breakers. This work will be conducted as an extension of the 23-24 transmission planning process, and we'll be recommending mitigations to be sought for approval in either the July or September Board of Governors meetings. To meet the renewable generation requirements established in the CPUC resource generation portfolios that were provided to the ISO for this planning cycle, an additional 7 projects that are policy driven are recommended, totaling $4.59 billion. 2 of the projects are eligible for competitive solicitation, And as Neil noted, a number of these projects are related to integrating the offshore wind in the North Coast area that was identified in the base portfolio by the CPUC. The economic studies investigating market efficiency opportunities to reduce total cost to ratepayers through the transmission upgrades not otherwise needed for reliability or accessing renewables and serving load were conducted as a part of this year's cycle. No projects driven solely by market efficiencies are being recommended in this plan. Next slide, please. And as I indicated earlier, the interregional process is a two-year process coordinated with the other planning regions for consideration of interregional transmission project proposals as potential solutions. And as I indicated in year one, last cycle, there was no projects that were identified to bring forward into year two to be assessed in this year's planning cycle. And stakeholder comments, we do really appreciate in terms of the engagement with stakeholders throughout the transmission planning process. And the ISO received comments on the transmission plan that were generally in support for the reliability policy and economic assessment and recommendation within this year's transmission plan. There were some concerns expressed with a few of the recommended reliability-driven projects being deferred to next planning cycle, as PG&E had only submitted conceptual projects in the request window as potential mitigation. The ISO continued to assess the reliability needs that were identified in the reliability assessment to develop in conjunction the projects that we have recommended to mitigate the reliability constraints identified within the transmission plan after the initial stakeholder consultation and through the development of the transmission plan. There was also some concerns expressed to potential stranded assets or delay of recommended transmission due to the floating offshore wind technical development that is currently underway. As Neil indicated, the ISO acknowledges and appreciates stakeholders' concerns expressed regarding the inherent uncertainty with the development of new technologies such as floating offshore wind off the California coast. In balancing the need to engage promptly on long lead transmission while remaining in step with numerous other parallel development paths needed to enable offshore wind to develop, the ISO is committed to both seeking to prudently manage expenditures that could be subject to cost recovery processes, as well as providing industry transparency on the pace of transmission development activities and the associated cost exposures. Next slide. So in summary, there's 26 projects totaling $6.1 billion that were found to be needed. And as he indicated, we're continuing to refine the recommendation on 3 reliability-driven projects as an extension of the 23-24 transmission plan, and we'll bring those to the board in either July or September timeframe. And then the 2 projects that were eligible for competitive solicitation are policy-driven projects of the new Humboldt 500 kV substation with a 500 kV line to the Collingsville substation. This will be energized as AC initially, but built and designed for future conversion to DC. And then the other is the new 500 kV line from the Humboldt new substation that would be created in the other project across to the Fern Road substation. Next slide, please. So with this, the 2023-2024 transmission plan is recommended for approval, and the plan continues to use the zonal approach for resource development as a foundation for interconnection process prioritization and for focus of procurement activities. It continues to pursue low emission strategies in addressing reliability needs on the ISO controlled grid. And it sets a foundation for achieving higher renewable energy goals of the state and provides a prudent and economic development of the transmission plan. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was very thorough. I just have one quick question for you. Are there any examples of floating offshore wind development in the United States at this point?
In the United States, no. There is some worldwide, particularly in areas like the offshore or off the coast of Aberdeen. There's a project, as well as off the coast in Norway. There's also a floating project that has recently just come into service.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. We have a number of questions from board members, and I didn't see which order you went up, so I'll just go up my boxes on my screen. Severin.
Actually, I think Mary had her hand up first. She's at the top of your
Oh.
screen, I bet.
Mary, do you want to go ahead then?
Oh, wow. Sure. I'll take a deference from Severin to go first. Yeah, no, I just want to clarify a couple things. Jeff, back there on page 6, you know, where you show the zones on slide 6.
Yep.
Okay, so that represents everything, the status quo or everything we need to do by 2045. The total amount of megawatts, the 164,993 megawatts. Is that, what does that tell us on page 6?
The graph on the
Right.
left is from the 20-year outlook, and we'll be updating this as when we release the update of the 20-year outlook in June. And the graph represents, and the bubbles kind of identify where is the resource zones. And at a high level in the 20-year outlook on the left, what was the past and where did we need the transmission that we had identified in the 20-year outlook? In the graph or in the diagram on the right, it's really just showing where are the zones, and the 20-year outlook will migrate to look similar to this diagram as we've evolved in last year's transmission plan, the zonal approach and how we've taken. And what this graph represents is in those regions, what is the base portfolio that is in each of those zones, as well as the sensitivity that we looked at. So if you look at, let's say, the northern, the PG&E north of Greater Bay, the base had 2,000 megawatts in it, and the sensitivity had 1,300 megawatts. And kind of feeding into that base, there is the offshore wind that feeds into that north coast area that we studied, where there was 1.6 gigawatts of resources. So it's the graph on the right is really just showing in each of those zones how much resources have been identified that we're planning for.
To get us to the 164,993.
Well, in the base port, the one on the right really reflects the 2023-24 portfolio, which is 85 gigawatts.
Yeah, no, I it's the right one. I'm curious about. Okay, does that show us the goal of how many megawatts we want to do?
No, it's representing if we actually jump to which slide is it? The previous slide. It's representing for the 23-24 portfolio by 2035, the 85 gigawatts that's in that graph. How is that allocated to the different zones? If you go to the next slide, how much is allocated in each of the zones? And if you added up the base for all of those, it would come to 85 gigawatts.
The one on the right.
Yeah, the one on the right.
Okay, so then just to clarify one more thing, the formula that was developed is how we're going to prioritize the order of how things get done. That's how.
That may be getting, this is what we use for planning and for identifying the projects that we're recommending for approval for the transmission system.
That's why I like it. But the order in which it goes in, right? The prioritizing of what goes first, second, third.
When you're meaning prioritizing, you're meaning?
Meaning the new zonal formula, to clarify, is what's going to help us prioritize the order in which we'll go in.
It helps. It'll feed into, and as Danielle will talk about in the interconnection process enhancements, the zonal is also used as we're looking at it, and it's really in those areas and in it's consistent within the interconnection process, the areas and the areas that we study the requested interconnections. And it's looking at where have we planned the transmission system and aligning then in terms of setting the direction of where is for the interconnection opportunities that for interconnection that we've planned this transmission system based upon the CPUC's portfolio.
Perfect, thank you.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, okay, now Severin.
Actually, I think Joe was ahead of
Oh,
me.
it's still up, for crying out loud. All right, go ahead, Joe. Everyone wants to be last, I guess. Oh, let's see one.
He
from
wants the
Angelina.
last word. And actually, I have two questions, and I'll ask one now. And if Severin doesn't ask the other one, I'll raise my hand again.
Okay.
I'm very interested in these North Coast projects. And I get it that there's uncertainty about the pace of the development of the offshore wind resources that they're to interconnect. Can you provide a little more detail on what is exactly being proposed in terms of the number of years you're expecting it to take to actually, and I also appreciate the fact that you have to start now if we want it later, because these projects will take a very long, these are big projects that will take a long time to do. So what is the life cycle of these projects in terms of how long they'll take to build? And how do you build in sort of these cost controls and effectively off ramps that align the development with the actual pace of the resources that need to be interconnected becoming available to interconnect?
Well, I'll start, and then Neil can add some to it as well. Is when we're looking at these, they are long lead time. We're looking at in the order of 10 years for the development of the transmission from really the transmission plan to looking at in the 2034, 2035 timeframe of when these facilities would be in service. And so that's one of the things, as I was indicating, for us managing through the process of subject to the approval, going for competitive solicitation, which would be probably approximately 1 year from now to the award. And then the initial upfront is related to things like the siting and permitting and those activities and taking over a period of time before you get into some of the major expenditures for needing to order capital and or order equipment and that. And so through the process of the kind of life cycle of kind of process, that's what we're looking to managing those costs, and through transparent processes, being able to update kind of where we are and the status prior to major equipment being major expenditures being made. And monitoring in terms of where is the floating offshore wind. Neil, did you have something else you wanted to
Yes,
add to?
yeah, it's Neil here. I'll just add in a few more words about the actual process we envision itself. The two largest and foundational projects here are both the ones that Jeff indicated will be competitively procured. So in this year's plan, we did take two steps that are a bit unusual, but to recognize the unique challenges here. We did clarify in the transmission plan the expectation that we would be developing additional monitoring and transparency around the pace of expenditures, especially as we approach critical decision points on major equipment orders and such. And we also indicated in the functional specifications for those projects that there would be additional reporting required. We've not tried to define the exact process yet. We will need to work that out, but we're almost a year away from having competitively procured project sponsors in place to work with. We would be expecting to lay out the details of the cost monitoring in the approved project sponsor agreement. That is our arrangement with a sponsor from the time they're selected through to the project actually coming online. So that's the vehicle we will use to lay out additional reporting requirements and transparency requirements to manage the costs over the 10-year period. But we did want to be clear right up front in the functional specification that there would be a requirement for that detail. And those are things we will work out with the project sponsor after the sponsor's been selected so that we know who the counterparty is. So that way, you know, the transparency is critical to us on this, both on our intention as well as, to be blunt, we want people that are participating in the competitive solicitation process to know at the onset that there will be additional process wrapped around the project execution here.
Great. Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful.
Okay, Severin.
Okay. I actually just want to clarify one thing and put these numbers in a bit of context so when they get discussed in the press, as they no doubt will, they have some context around them. On page 167 of the transmission plan, there's a graph, TAC rates with 2023, 2024 projects. I'm sure you're familiar with it, that has the 2024 projection with new projects and the 2023 projection, and shows the drop of 358 for the first year. First of all, I just wanted to confirm, these are nominal. These are not adjusted for inflation, right?
Neil?
Those should be as spent dollars.
Right. Okay, great. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, that number comes through assuming that all of these projects go to fruition. That is, assuming that all of the offshore wind gets built. And there are, as you just pointed out, a lot of off ramps if that doesn't come to fruition.
And it also includes all other previously approved projects that may not be online yet. So not just this year's plan, but all other previously approved projects that are not in service yet.
So assuming that this projection actually comes true, which is sort of the upper bound, that's $20. The TAC goes to $20 per megawatt hour, which is 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And just to put that in context, retail rates for residential consumers these days are about 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So when we talk about the skyrocketing rates in California, transmission is not what is doing it. In fact, I went back and got a graph that goes back to 2008 and did an inflation adjustment of it. The rates have TAC has gone up, adjusted for inflation from 2008 till today. But when you do that adjustment, it's gone up by about 1 cent per kilowatt hour over the last 15 years, adjusted for inflation. So I just want to be clear that $6 billion is a lot of money. We all recognize that, and we are trying to be good stewards of it. But at the same time, when we discuss what's driving residential rates, transmission and the TAC from the CAISO is not it. That's not a question, really, but no, you're welcome to comment.
Well, I would just add on the comment that we agree with you. At the same time, we also do recognize that our decisions do impact costs. So the importance of cost efficiency is not lost on us. So as Jeff indicated, the goal is to find the most efficient and cost-effective solution in the long term. That's really important to us in the decision-making process. So we're not, and the other part is that the transmission, you know, when you look at what's driving it, the transmission components themselves are only important insofar as what they enable. These reliability projects are enabling us to serve new load growth. The policy-driven projects accessing additional resource pools that are developed through integrated resource planning. So like I said, for us, we need to deliver the energy, we need to keep the lights on, and at the same time, we're looking for the most cost-effective way for the transmission grid to meet those needs.
Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Severin. Anything else from the board? Oh,
I have my
Angela,
hand up, but
there
I
you
don't
are.
think it's
Hands-
very visible.
No, I was gonna say
Yeah.
it's blending into the building behind you, but I see
I
it.
know,
Yeah.
I need to change the color, I think. Severin, really appreciate what you said. There's always the misunderstanding and perception that transmission costs are what's driving rates and rate increases, and that's not the case. And we've been explaining that we do need to be prudent. We do need to have the highest value and the lowest cost in terms of meeting our climate and environmental goals, and of course operating, most importantly of all, operating a reliable and resilient system. And to that effect, I like the zonal approach. I think this is the way to move forward for sure. The wind projects are very exciting. I wanted to ask, do we have a detailed point of interconnection for them yet, and how that's going to work out, especially in the context of Diablo Canyon and what's happening with Diablo Canyon? And then a second part to the question, because we are operating more regionally through the energy imbalance market, EDAM, and then continuing on to a more integrated approach to the greater West. Have we talked with the other Pacific Northwest states? Because I know that they're very interested in participating in an offshore wind development program as well. And I was just wondering if anyone had approached you, or there have been any conversations going on in coordinating a broader plan of development.
Yeah, in regards to the interconnection point in the Humboldt area, that new substation that's being created will be for the point of interconnection for the offshore wind to connect to, and then through those lines connecting to the greater grid. In the Diablo area, that's one that we're still working some details out. Is there a need for a new substation, or will it interconnect in Diablo itself, all or a portion of them? And those we're still working with the developers on for that purpose.
And if
And
you can
then-
keep us posted on that, that would be really great, because I mean, we do have to be able. Humboldt is relatively easy. It's the Diablo interconnection that I know is a little bit more complicated.
It is, from the point of with Diablo currently operating, as well as access to the station and that. So that's those discussions will continue, and we'll keep you informed. In regards to conversations with the outer states, we have been engaged with. Northern Grid did an economic assessment as part of their process that we were engaged with. The CEC, through the work with the Schatz Energy Center, undertook an assessment that really looked at the whole North Coast that we participated with, as well as there's currently the DOE offshore West Coast offshore study that they're undertaking with PNNL Labs that we're also engaged in with those studies.
Great. It would be good if you can keep us updated on that as well, because if there's economies of scale or efficiencies that can be achieved, that would be good to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelina. Joe?
Thanks. I had one more question as long as we're starting to talk about looking ahead to future plans. And I know you can't do this now, but do you foresee these reliability driven projects increasing to meet this load growth relative to some of these policy projects, which have been the big ticket items historically, given that some of the major build-outs for the policy driven projects are starting to get approved from these processes that we're undertaking?
It's Neil here. I'll take a first shot at that and then turn over to Jeff if he has more to add. I think in general, what we're expecting to see in the near term is that there are a few issues we've identified already that will need to be addressed in next year's transmission plan that still relate to our intra-California policy-driven needs. You know, last year we had talked about the Trout Canyon Lugo or an alternative to that path. And there are a few other areas that Jeff and the team have identified that will need additional work in next year's transmission plan. After that, I do expect that we'll see some tailing off on policy-driven needs, and there will be, as we do expect to see, some increase in reliability-driven needs depending on how load growth takes off, especially around some of the larger loads that can appear more quickly, such as data center loads and some of these others that are raising concerns. So I think, as I said, to summarize, I would expect to see a bit of a tailing off of some of our intrastate policy requirements, more discussion with our neighbors outside of California about participation in joint projects outside of California to help bring additional resources to our border, as well as a possible increase or refocusing on some of the reliability needs in these areas with particular load growth. Jeff, is there anything you'd care to add?
No, that covers pretty comprehensively.
Thanks.
Thanks for that additional context. That's very, very helpful.
Great. Any other comments from board members?
Nothing, and just to say, thank you so much for all the hard work. This is a very comprehensive plan, terrific briefing, and we look forward to updates. This is the bread and butter of what the ISO does, so really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Jan, I was just going to add to that I concur with what Angelina just said, but also that the importance of the 20-year plan, because getting to those ultimate goals of those larger numbers is just more layering on what we're looking at now. So I'm glad we're doing the long-term planning with the short term. Thanks.
Yes, I think we're a little bit even out ahead of the recent FERC order. We're already doing some of the things that they want people to be doing. So
We are.
in the right direction. Okay, so it's time for public comment. So Tegan, I'm going to turn it over to you to determine if any of our meeting attendees would like to make any comments on the transmission plan.
All right, just a quick reminder, if you would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You'll see a notification when it is your turn to be unmuted. Please click on that pop-up to become unmuted. Then just state your name, the organization you represent, and your question. If you're joining us via audio only, dial #2 on your telephone keypad. All right, we'll go to the first caller in queue.
Good morning. This is Ed Smeloff. Good morning, Chair Shorey and members of the board. It's good to see you all via Zoom. I'm representing the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies, that's commonly known as CERT, and we're supportive of the recommendations in the 2023-2024 draft transmission plan and urge its adoption by the Board of Governors. Do want to make 3 comments. First, CERT's very pleased to see that the CAISO's recommended moving forward on multiple reliability projects that serve disadvantaged communities of the state, where the grid is somewhat weaker, like the San Joaquin Valley and the Salinas Valley. Given the growing impacts of climate change on many agricultural communities and the need for economic development in these areas of the state, important that the local electric networks be reinforced so that they have the capacity and are more reliable and resilient. I did want to briefly comment on the recommendations related to the North Coast offshore wind. We're very appreciative of the comments that Jeff Billington and Neil Miller made about the stage process. I think it's been very responsive. We were one of the parties that commented in the comment about the need to take into account some of the uncertainties and risks associated with the challenging elements of developing offshore wind on the North Shore. We do believe that it's important for you to go ahead and proceed with the competitive solicitation so that you can begin the permitting process as quickly as possible, but that you provide for off-ramps in the event that those risks do come to fruition and the project's delayed or perhaps deferred. We do think, and I appreciate Governor Galateva's comment about coordinating with Northern Grid and PacifiCorp. There are going to be some additional leases off the shore of Oregon. I think it does make sense to work with our counterparts in the Northwest to think about a more integrated system that may include some subsea cables and a subsea network that enables more cost-effective delivery of a larger amount of offshore wind. So lastly, I did want to point out and comment that, as your staff mentioned, there were no projects that were recommended coming out of the economic assessment. even though it was very clear that there is a growing amount of congestion on Path 15 and Path 26, which connects, the Southern California Edison and the PG&E grids. So we're seeing a lot of curtailment, increasing curtailment this year, particularly for solar generation that's coming out of Southern California and the Central Valley. So, we do look forward. We think that there is going to be a need for additional large-scale transmission upgrades on Path 15 and perhaps Path 26. We're hopeful that in the upcoming process, your 24-25 process, that the economic analysis will also take into account the expectation that older gas-fired generation in the Central Valley, the Bay Area, and the Los Angeles Basin needs to be retired, and that the analysis that you conduct will support that will include the economic benefits and social benefits of retiring those plants and developing transmission. We think that's consistent with the new FERC order 1920, and looking forward to seeing a more robust economic analysis of the benefits of transmission in the upcoming cycles. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to make these comments and encourage you to adopt the 23-24 transmission plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Nice to hear from you. Any
Can
other?
I ask one question of
Oh,
Ed?
yes, go. I'm sorry, go right
Ed-
ahead.
Ed, this is Severin. I was just, that was an interesting point about congestion and curtailment. But I haven't seen analysis, and maybe I just missed it, that those two are highly correlated. Have you done that or seen analysis that curtailment is being significantly enhanced by congestion, south to north, presumably?
So south to north is the direction of the congestion. And if you take a look at the economic section of the transmission plan, while I don't know if there's some sort of formal correlation, there's certainly the patterns of where the congestion occurs, where the curtailment occurs are along Path 26 and Path 15. Your economic analysis showed that there can be a cost benefit economic upgrades of both the transmission line that goes from Los Angeles over to Moss Landing, as well as certain parts of Path 15. We think that, but the point I wanted to make is that if you're going to retire gas generation in the Bay Area, in the Central Valley, that's going to increase the amount of flows that are coming from outside those areas, from the Southern California, and the large amount of solar generation and storage to be developed in the Central Valley. And that's going to trigger a need for more transmission. So we'll see what comes up in the 2025 plan,
thanks.
and as well as your 20-year outlook.
Yes, it's Neil here. If I could also just offer a bit of additional comment there, that as was pointed out, each year's transmission plan does do a sweep of where we see congestion and assigns an economic value to alleviating that congestion. So we then test that against the cost of trying to develop a transmission alternative that would mitigate. And that's something that we will be, it is part of our inherent process, and we'll be continuing to do going forward, including in next year's transmission plan. And the issue of the pace of retirement of gas-fired generation is something that we're coordinating closely with the Public Utilities Commission on, because much of the current gas-fired fleet is also being relied upon to provide some critical shaping capability as we manage the energy transition. So these are factors that are definitely part of the planning process each year, and that we will be putting additional attention to in the 24-25 transmission plan. That process is already underway.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Neil. Anyone else? Okay, back to Tegan and our public commenters.
All right, we'll go to the next person in the queue.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Collinghit and I work at Vineyard Offshore. Thanks for allowing public comment and my comments, which will just take a few minutes. First, I'll introduce Vineyard Offshore, and then I'll talk a little. So Vineyard Offshore is America's most experienced offshore wind developer. We were awarded a lease in Northern California. It's called Lease Area 562 by BOEM, and it's in west of Humboldt Bay. Our company, Vineyard Offshore, is backed by Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, and we're one of the largest renewable energy infrastructure funds in the world. And we have a portfolio of about 5,000 megawatts of floating offshore wind projects. And just yesterday, a 600 megawatt floating project was interconnected and is operational in Taiwan. I know someone asked a question earlier today about Scotland. There are projects in development in Scotland as well, but I did want to mention that there are floating wind projects that are operational around the world, and happy to bring that experience to bear as we work through our development project in California. So I do want to express my thanks to CAISO, the board today, for hearing about the TTP, and also to the staff for putting together the plan that's before you. We, as a developer of offshore wind, in particular in developing our project off of Humboldt, are supportive of the TPP. We think it reflects a critical need in California to meet its reliability, deliverability, and clean energy goals in the future. It's critical for integrating the 1.66 gigawatts that are planned for phase one, and for future planning for interconnection of additional offshore wind in California. Happy to answer questions today about our plans in California, or in future conversations with CAISO staff and other members of the California stakeholder community, which all contribute to this effort. And we look forward to working with the broader California community to develop our project. But again, wanted to express our support for the TPP today. We acknowledge so much thought has gone into it, and look forward to looking forward to the procurement for next year. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Carrie. Does anyone have any questions for Carrie? Okay, thank you. Next.
All right, we'll go to the next caller in queue.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you
We can hear you. Yes.
Perfect. My name is Derek Abbott. I'm with Tejon Ranch Company, and I wanted to thank the chair and the board for allowing public comment on the transmission plan today. It's obvious, as others have noted, that staff has put an immense amount of work into this. I comment from Tejon Ranch Company, wanted to give a little bit of background on us. We are a agribusiness and real estate development company at the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley. We are part of the effort to transform Kern County's economy from a oil and agriculture-based economy to a diversified economy. And we have been developing significant industrial and transportation uses at the south end of the San Joaquin Valley. I wanted to thank the staff and the board in preparation of the plan. They included an improvement project called the Tejon Area Improvement in the ISO plan, and recommended it be included for approval. We provided a comment previously indicating that capacity on the PG&E system in our area is severely constrained, and is constraining our ability to pursue new development, new intensive economic uses, as well as the electrification of transportation in our region. And the Tejon area is a critical priority area for medium duty and heavy duty electrification investment, as identified in various state plans. And we are one of the largest kind of transportation fueling stops in the nation for private passenger vehicles as well as commercial trucks. So with that, I just wanted to raise a question for staff, perhaps. In the original draft, the date of the Tejon Area Improvement was July 2027, which is supportive of our planned projected load growth that we've discussed with PG&E. In the final draft that's in front of the board for approval, there are two dates identified. One date on page 150 or on page 56 is 2029 now. Another date is the original Q3 2027 date, which is on a later page of the plan in a later table, page 160. We prefer the sooner date, of course, because we're trying to increase capacity in our area quickly in combination with working with PG&E, and just wanted to request if it's possible that the earlier date be included, or just clarify what the date is assumed for the implementation of that project. And that's
I'll have
all my
it's-
comments, and I appreciate staff's efforts.
Thank you, Derek, and we will have someone on the staff go get that clarification and get back to you on
Okay.
that. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? All right, thank you very much. Next.
All right, we'll go to the next caller in queue.
This is Matt Plummer from PG&E. I'll be brief. I just want to thank staff for their tremendous work and partnership with stakeholders, especially the consideration and inclusion of a number of reliability projects in our service territory. And we encourage this board to adopt the transmission plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Okay, next.
I'm not showing any other callers in queue at this time.
Great. Last chance. All right, well, with that then, are there any further comments from board members before we go to a vote? All right, well, congratulations to the staff. Keep up the good work. I know we've still got lots in front of us. I'll turn it back over to Roger then for the motion.
Thank you, Chair Shorey. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the ISO 2023-24 transmission plan is attached to the memorandum dated May 15, 2024. If I can have a motion.
So moved.
So I'll
Second.
second.
You guys are so enthusiastic. All right.
I know.
Governor Borenstein, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Edo,
Aye.
Governor Galitova,
Aye.
Governor Leslie,
Aye.
and Chair Shorey.
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you, Governor.
Congratulations. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Neil, and thank you all the staff, Elliot, everybody that's worked on this.
Thank you.
I know there's
Thank
a
you.
huge amount of work involved in getting us to this stage, so keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you
All
for the
right.
support.
Okay, so now on my agenda, I just need to check with Roger. I'm showing that the SunZia PTO application is next, but then I have another agenda that showed the interconnection process enhancement.
No, it is agenda item number 6 is the SunZia transmission.
Okay, all right, good. Then we will go ahead and move into consideration of SunZia's subscriber PTO application. And I think Neil is
Great.
picked up again today on this one.
Yes, thank you. So, and first, thanks for the approval for the transmission plan. And now I will be asking Riddy Ray, our lead contracts negotiator, to present the decision item to approve SunZia's application to become a subscriber participating transmission owner. You may recall that this application hinged on approval by FERC of our subscriber participating transmission owner structure, and that FERC approval was received on March 12th of this year. So this decision item is dealing specifically with the application to become a participating transmission owner. With that, I'll now turn to Riddy to walk you through the background and the detail of the application process. Thank you. Riddy?
Good afternoon, members of the board. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm here presenting a recommendation on a decision for the participating transmission owner application submitted by SunZia Transmission LLC. And I'll move over to the overview of the project. SunZia Transmission LLC is the applicant, and they're developing a transmission project primarily located in the state of New Mexico. This transmission project consists of multiple elements, and we'll include that in the overview. There is the high voltage DC transmission system, which is a 51 mile, 525 kV bipole DC line connecting a significant amount of wind generation in New Mexico to the Penal Central substation operated by Salt River Project. The connection of the HVDC system to the Penal Central substation is through two 500 kV AC lines, which are less than a mile each. From Penal Central onwards, all the way to Palo Verde, SunZia Transmission has the authority to use 2,131 megawatts of firm transmission rights that have been acquired from multiple transmission entities in Arizona. These entitlement rights are subject to their open access transmission tariffs and the transmission service agreements, and allows the energy to flow to Palo Verde and into the ISO balancing authority from there on. In terms of the schedule, the project is in development and has been in development for a while. The transmission system itself is expected to start commissioning from April 2025 onwards. And given the size of the wind project, the generation itself will start commissioning early 2026 and will continue on reaching fully commercial status by April of 2026. I'll provide an overview of the transmission owner application process itself. This applies to transmission owners that are required to submit an application to the ISO. The applicant transmission owner submits an application to the ISO. These applications are posted publicly on the ISO website for public comment. The ISO Board of Governors must authorize the ISO's acceptance of the application, which is what we are bringing to the board today. Following this, there are multiple steps which lead to the final transfer of operational control. This includes the applicant transmission owner executing the ISO's transmission control agreement and subsequently having it filed at FERC. FERC will need to approve the transmission control agreement alongside the other tariffs that the transmission owner is required to file. And once those approvals have been received and the transmission owner turns over operational control of the assets over to the ISO, the transmission entity becomes a participating transmission owner with the California ISO. To provide a little more insight into the transmission owner application itself, the SunZia is the second transmission owner to apply to the ISO to join as a subscriber participating transmission owner model. It is a new transmission owner model that the ISO had developed through an extensive policy process. We filed our tariff at FERC and it was approved earlier this year, and that is what SunZia is looking to leverage. Previously, we had brought Transwest Express's application to the board for approval under the subscriber PTO model. Just a little more description of the Arizona entitlements, which are the firm transmission rights extending from Penal Central all the way to Palo Verde. These rights will allow the flow of energy into the ISO balancing authority area beyond Palo Verde and will be subject to the open access transmission tariff of the transmission owners and operators of the physical facilities, and the transmission service agreements that SunZia Transmission LLC and its affiliates have executed with these transmission providers. We did receive comments from multiple stakeholders regarding the application specifically, and some of the comments were specific to the implementation of these entitlement rights in the ISO market. We have since then engaged both verbally as well as in writing with the entities that have raised these questions to provide them a better insight into how these entitlement rights are operationalized within the ISO market. Now moving to the recommendation, we recommend that the board approve the ISO's acceptance of SunZia Transmission LLC's application as a participating transmission owner. SunZia's incorporation into the ISO balancing authority area is critical to enable the delivery of wind generation from New Mexico, which is part of the California Public Utility Commission's 2024-2025 preferred system plan. SunZia remains eligible to join as a participating transmission owner, considering that these entitlement rights from Penal Central to Palo Verde can be used to provide a path for the wind generation to serve load within the California ISO BA. As per the process, the SunZia application to join as a participating transmission owner has been posted on the ISO website for 60 days. And we have received comments from stakeholders, and as outlined before, although those comments raised questions on the implementation of the entitlement rights, they did not object to SunZia Transmission joining the ISO as a participating transmission owner. I think that wraps it up.
Great, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and open it up first to the board and see if anybody has any questions or comments.
My hand is still blended.
Oh, yeah, you know something, you do have it up, and I'll go ahead. I don't know if you or Mary were first. I'm going to give it to you because of your faded hand. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, this is incredible. The ISO leadership should be commended here again. We were leaders with the policy-driven transmission, and now with the SPTO, the subscriber participation transmission owner. This is very exciting because it allows for new participants to come in, access to new resources, and especially renewable resources, both with Transwest and SunZia coming into California. So congratulations again to the team. I hope that we'll have more participants utilizing this newly recognized opportunity since early 2024. So onwards and upwards. Just wanted to say congratulations, appreciate all the hard work and the leadership that ISO is exercising again, that's recognized not only locally, but regionally, nationally, and globally as well. So go team.
Thank you, Angelina. Let's go ahead and go to Mary now.
Yeah, no, I want to thank staff as well of the CAISO, because this has been a few years in coming, and it's really going to turn out to be one of the most important programs we've done recently. And having been at the kickoff of the Western Spirit Line, which Pattern did out of New Mexico, that brought in over 1 gigawatt into California several years ago, you know, the fact that I would also like to congratulate them, Pattern, for continuing to put these projects together successfully, because I believe at the time, the Western Spirit Line was one of the largest renewable energy lines, basically privately funded, that was actually successful, and that California had a big role in that because we took the win happily, and based on our transmission planning, we need their win. We need New Mexico's win. So this seems to be a great partnership and a great day to be able to vote and accept SunZia's application. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary. Any other comments from the board? Angelina, do you have another comment? No, okay. With that, then I think we're ready to see if we have any public comment. So Tegan, could you ask our meeting attendees if anyone would like to make a comment?
All right, if you'd like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You'll get a notification when your line is ready to be unmuted. Please click on that pop-up to become unmuted. All right, we'll go to the caller in queue.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Shorey, Vice Chair Bornstein, Board of Governors. Thank you. My name is Cameron Yurkowski, and I'm the Director of Regulatory and Market Affairs for Pattern Energy. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today, and thank you for considering SunZia Transmission's application to become a subscriber participating transmission owner. I will keep my comments brief, and I'm mostly here to make myself available for any questions. But I would like to also acknowledge, CAISO's success in designing and obtaining approval for the SPTO model. It is, as was just mentioned, truly a innovative transmission development policy that I hope gains traction around the West and around the country. Also, on behalf of Pattern Energy and our whole team, I would like to thank CAISO from top to bottom for all the support in preparing our application and preparing for the next steps. In particular, I'd like to thank Riddy Ray and Deb Levine for their weekly tutorials, creative problem solving, and diligent work ethic. Thank you very much. Besides our application, we did review the materials staff prepared for the board and are available for any questions the board may have. Thank you again for your consideration. That concludes my comments, and would just also wish you a good continued transmission day today. It's an important day and an important topic indeed. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Cam. Does anyone have any questions for Cameron? No? Okay.
No, just to say that it's good to hear your voice, Cameron. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for bringing forward a great project and for recognizing ISO and all the hard work, and shout out to Debbie Levine and the whole team. Thank you.
Right. Is there any, Tegan, anyone else wants to make a comment?
I'm not showing any other hands raised at this time.
Last chance out there, anybody? Okay, we'll close the public comment then. Thank you, Cam. Okay, at this point then, I will turn it back over to Roger to lead us through making a motion.
Thank you, Chair Shorey. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approve the ISO's acceptance of the application of SunZia Transmission LLC for participating transmission owner status, conditioned on 1, SunZia Transmission LLC execution of the transmission control agreement, and 2, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's acceptance of a transmission owner. Oh, sorry, I think I lost my place there. Acceptance of transmission owner tariff as set forth in the memorandum dated May 15, 2024. So this is how you know it was me and not artificial intelligence. So if I can have a motion.
Moved.
Second.
And second. Oh, and that's right. We'll go through. Governor Bornstein, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Edo.
Aye.
Governor Galetova.
Aye.
Governor Leslie.
Aye.
And Chair Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes.
Excellent. Congratulations to our staff and also to Pattern Energy. We look forward to working with you to bring this to fruition. Okay, I think that closes out the SunZia project item on the agenda then. And so now we will move on to agenda item number 7, which is not scheduled for action at this meeting. Today it is a briefing on the proposed interconnection process enhancements. We've had a lot of interest in this topic, and so Roger, would you go through to start the, we have received a lot of correspondence on this, so I want to be sure that those letters are all recorded or added to a public record.
Yes, thank you, Chair Shorey. As we always do on these, we have, for agenda item 7, we have a pretty large number of letters coming in as recently as 9:39 this morning. We have 9 letters received, and those letters have all been provided to the board. And as I said, some of them very recently, but the board, I'm sure, will diligently review them in due time. So those letters were California Wind Energy Association, Large Scale Solar Association, California Energy Storage Alliance, the Northern California Power Agency, on behalf of the 6 cities of Anaheim, Azusa, Banning, Colton, Pasadena, and Riverside, California, Thompson Colburn LLP, California Community Choice Association, 174 Power Global, the California Public Utilities Commission, and AYPA Power. Again, all those letters have been provided to the board and are in the record. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Shorey.
Great, thank you very much. And as Roger mentioned, all of the board members will, I'm sure, take the time and opportunity to read all that's been submitted. I at least did not get a couple of the letters that Roger just mentioned, so I assume they're in my inbox, and I will look for them, as will the rest of the board. So at this point, then, we will go ahead and turn it over to, once again, Neil Miller for a staff presentation. This is his day.
Thank you. And yes, I'm back. Thank you. Today I will be introducing Danielle Mills, our Principal of Infrastructure Policy Development, to provide a comprehensive briefing on our final proposal on the 2023 interconnection process enhancements efforts. I really can't overstress the importance of this initiative and the challenges our team and stakeholders have faced in developing these transformative changes to our interconnection process. Our current interconnection processes have proven very effective for over a decade in managing significant numbers of interconnection applications through an annual application window and cluster study process, coupled with perhaps the lowest application burdens for filing new applications among the ISOs and RTOs. However, with the level of competition skyrocketing in the last two application cycles, April 2021 saw applications totaling 3 times more capacity than our annual peak load, and April 2023 saw applications totaling 7 times our peak load. Transformative changes are necessary. At a time when we're adding more resources to the grid than each year than in the ISO's history, including approximately adding 17 gigawatts of new installed capacity over the last 4 years, we cannot allow these excessive volumes of applications to create a logjam, preventing additional projects from moving forward over the next 5 years. As Elliot noted in his earlier comments, we also can't be timid in our approach, and the current logjam issues must be addressed. The changes Danielle will describe will impact everyone. Aligned with the coordination in place with our state agencies, the intent is to fundamentally shift interconnection study efforts to areas that align with our transmission planning based on state resource planning. We will also seek earlier engagement from load-serving entities to explore interest in projects before they enter the interconnection queue instead of after, so that the interconnection process is no longer used as a screening process for developers to gather information, but instead focuses on more advanced projects with a higher likelihood of ultimately being procured and interconnected. Given the scope of the changes and the competing interests of different stakeholders, the team and the working groups face the daunting task of finding middle ground and compromises to achieve this transition. The team worked with our stakeholders through numerous working group sessions, laying the foundation for the proposals, and multiple rounds of stakeholder proposals, papers, presentations, and comments as the ISO's final proposal took shape. And I have to thank our stakeholders for the tremendous effort that this involved. That being said, while many of the concepts included in this final proposal evolved from stakeholder proposals and comments, not everyone will be getting everything that they may have sought, and there will continue to be conflicting differences of opinion as to the best path forward. I do believe that the final proposal has threaded the needle on a comprehensive and cohesive package that will help the ISO and stakeholders bring the queue to more reasonable study volumes. We also recognize that the scope and impact of these changes is complex. We have therefore taken the additional step of presenting the final proposal here today as a briefing rather than a decision item, and will be returning at a special Board of Governors meeting scheduled for June 3rd to seek your approval. This will provide additional time for you, the Board of Governors, to consider all that you will hear today, both from staff as well as our stakeholders. I should also mention this is Danielle's first presentation to the Board of Governors since joining the ISO, so I want to welcome her to these proceedings. With that, I'll turn the microphone over to Danielle.
Neil, let me interrupt for just 1 second. I do not show the board meeting being on the 3rd. I am showing the board meeting is the 12th of June. Is that right?
Thank you. I had a typo there. It is on the 12th. My apologies.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, well, thank you, Neil, and thank you, Board of Governors. It's a pleasure to be here today talking to you about this timely and important topic. Next slide, please. I want to start by providing some context as to why we're here today and why this proposal is so timely. As Neil mentioned, the historical experience at the ISO has demonstrated leadership at interconnecting new resources to the grid in a timely and efficient manner. However, recent interconnection application windows have yielded unprecedented unprecedented amounts of interconnection requests, both in terms of the number of individual interconnection requests as well as the volume of the capacity of each cluster. So for cluster 14, we received over 373 individual applications and 94 gigawatts of new resource capacity in the queue. At that time, the ISO imposed some minor reforms with assurances that cluster 14 would be an anomaly and delayed the process in order to study all of those interconnection requests. Then with cluster 15 alone, we received an additional 541 interconnection requests totaling 347 gigawatts, really showing the need to do something to address both the interconnection request intake process, the process of evaluating all of those new interconnection requests, and also to address the 185 gigawatts of active projects that are currently in our queue, which are demonstrated on this bar at the bottom of the slide. So we did proceed with the process, the interconnection enhancements process, on two tracks. One was to address interconnection request intake, and the other is to address contract and queue management policies and processes to make sure that we're not allowing some of the earlier queued projects that may be lingering in the queue to create additional bottlenecks for more recent projects. But the point that's important to underscore here is that the level of competition in the queue is so high that it's become unmanageable for the ISO or participating transmission owners to study. And so as we see these increasing queue volumes, the value and the meaningfulness of the ISO's interconnection studies is diminished. So we need to create a process that's going to create some additional competition at the outset of our interconnection request process or interconnection process to ensure that only the best and most commercially ready projects are moving forward. Next slide, please. So the foundational element of our interconnection process enhancements initiative is the memorandum of understanding that we signed with the California Public Utilities Commission and the California Energy Commission in December of 2022. Under this memorandum of understanding, we're really seeking to tighten the linkages between the resource and transmission planning elements, which, as you've seen and approved today, have been working quite efficiently in terms of bringing new transmission onto the system. But what we need to do in the Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative is to find ways to link the procurement process with that transmission planning value, and to ensure that the procurement is then driving and connected to the interconnection process. So we've done that by ensuring additional engagement by load-serving entities earlier in the interconnection process to ensure that their procurement needs are going to be met by the projects that advance through the interconnection queue. Next slide, please. Under this MOU, the ISO intends to impose a new zonal approach, which is the ability for the ISO to prioritize interconnections in areas that will have available and planned transmission capacity. So the ISO will be using the transmission plan that, again, you all approved today, in order to designate zones as either transmission plan deliverability zones or merchant zones. Transmission plan deliverability zones will be evaluated by a constraint-based approach based on the project's point of interconnection to determine if a project in that zone can move forward to the scoring process. And I'll talk about the scoring process in a moment. Merchant projects or projects in merchant zones will be projects that do not have existing or approved transmission capacity and are outside of these areas that are demonstrated on the map. Those projects will continue to be able to move forward with a new pathway that we've revised, but will not be eligible for reimbursement in the same way that projects in transmission plan deliverability zones will be eligible. The ISO will determine which projects advance to the study process by using the project score, a distribution factor, and assessing 150% of the available capacity for each known area constraint. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic demonstration of the revised interconnection request intake process that we propose in the final proposal. And again, the emphasis is on transmission availability and project readiness. So in order to implement the zonal approach, the ISO will release data that will inform and support the data approach and inform interconnection customers about areas where existing and available transmission plan capacity deliverability exists. After that data is provided, and some of that data has already been provided to stakeholders and interested parties, but will continue to be updated throughout the next month or two based on transmission plan deliverability allocations, as well as the revised transmission plan or the approved transmission plan. Then we move to the interconnection request intake window, which is where all interconnection customers will have to meet all existing interconnection request requirements. And new interconnection customers will also need to submit scoring assessments directly to the ISO. At the same time, load serving entities will submit their own project selections of individual projects that are interested in interconnecting to the ISO queue to the ISO. Then we move to the third column, which is the verification process between transmission plan deliverability zones and merchant zones. The ISO will check projects' point of interconnection to confirm whether they will fall into the transmission plan deliverability pathway or the merchant pathway. And projects with points of interconnection with available capacity will move forward to the scoring process. The ISO will then validate all of the projects for site control and score the projects by combining the interconnection customers' individual self-assessment with the LSE selections, the load serving entity selections, for a total score. Then we move to the constraint analysis, which is the fifth column, where the ISO will determine the projects eligible for study based on 150% of the available or planned transmission capacity in that area. The ISO will resolve any ties in crossing that 150% threshold by assessing the distribution factor, and then will resolve any remaining ties by conducting a sealed bid market clearing auction. And then from that point on, projects that are successful in getting through that screening process will advance to the study process. The study process timelines are all articulated in our FERC Order 2023 filing, and we're not proposing any additional changes to those timelines as they're already relatively tight and should result in an efficient study process for the ISO. Thank you. So the zonal approach will prioritize interconnections in areas with available or planned transmission capacity. And as I mentioned, data availability is really critical in making sure that the zonal approach will work and that interconnection customers and load serving entities will be informed prior to the beginning of the interconnection request application window. So the ISO intends to produce a report prior to the interconnection request window that will include all of this critical information for stakeholders and allow them to do their due diligence about what point of interconnection will work and is best positioned to move a project forward into the study process. The ISO also proposes to release individual interconnection reports to the public with confidential information redacted, and will provide a heat map with specific interconnection information after each cluster study and each restudy, which is a requirement of FERC Order 2023, but is something that also is complementary to this revised process. The ISO, as I mentioned, will also capture all transmission plan deliverability allocations to make sure that all interconnection customers and load serving entities are working with up-to-date information. Next slide, please. From that point, the ISO proposes to score projects based on the interconnection customer's self-assessment and the selections that come in from load serving entities. And this is an area where we need to spend a little bit of time. We did provide additional guidance as to how this process would work in an addendum to the final proposal that was released last Friday. But the scoring criteria is a really critical element of this proposal because, as I mentioned, we have over 540 projects in our interconnection queue right now, all of which may be very poised for success and highly viable, but we need additional help from the load serving entities in helping us identify which projects have the highest likelihood of commercial success in addition to project viability and system need. We did receive quite a bit of stakeholder feedback on this as well, particularly the commercial interest piece. And I want to highlight here that the commercial interest piece will constitute 30% of a project's or 30% of the total weight of a score. So at this point, this is where we would incorporate load serving entity and off-taker interest very early in the process, again, before the study process, to ensure that the most commercially viable projects advance to the study process. It's important to recognize that this means that only about a third of the projects that will then advance to the study process will come in with load serving entity selections. The ISO feels that this is a necessary component of the project scoring process because it is influential but not determinative of which projects move forward. We've also incorporated a pathway oh, actually, before I move forward with the pathway, we've also included some assurances to try to maintain the level of utility ownership or load serving entity sponsored projects in this process. We've suggested a limitation of either 3 projects or 25% of an individual load serving entity's score or allocation to ensure that the amount of load serving entity sponsored projects that move forward is relatively consistent with what we've seen in the queue for the past several clusters. In addition, we've created a pathway for non-load serving entity interest. This is slightly different than how we conceptualize the load serving entity allocation process with good reason. First of all, load serving entities are required to carry a resource adequacy obligation for their customers by the state of California or their local regulatory authorities. Non-load serving entities do not have that obligation. In addition, it's very hard to define what makes up a non-load serving entity. And so there are almost infinite possibilities of what may constitute a non-LSE participating in this market. So for that reason, we've created a process where these types of customers, this may be commercial and industrial customers or financial entities, can still participate in the process and express interest in a certain project. But the weighting and the point system would be different. So these projects would be eligible for either 0 or 25 points, and it would be binary, and each non-load serving entity would only be able to express interest in one project. And this is really so that we can ensure that we're capturing this need and this interest, but also not allowing it to overcome the need for projects that are needed for resource adequacy requirements by the load serving entities. Then we include 2 additional, oh, sorry, go back, please. Then we include 2 additional types of scoring indicators around project viability and system need. Both of these are worth 35% of a total score. And the project viability will be assessed based on the completeness of a project's engineering design plan, anywhere from 0 to 50 points, depending on the percent of completeness of the plan. So this is intended to provide some granularity to the scores in that projects can receive anywhere from 0 to 50 points for it, though we expect, based on how engineering is normally conducted, that those will fall in specific increments and need to be stamped by a certified engineer. We'll also include points for expansions of facilities that are either under construction or in operation. As in the ISO's experience, we've seen that these projects tend to have a higher likelihood of success and fewer challenges in terms of permitting and other types of development milestones. For system need, we've included points for projects that can either provide local resource adequacy or for long lead time resources that have been identified in either the Public Utilities Commission's Integrated Resource Plan or in local regulatory authorities' plans as well. Next slide, please. In the case where there's a tie going into the 150% of available total capacity, the ISO proposes to assess the distribution factor of the tying project's points of interconnection as a tiebreaker. So the distribution factor is a measure of the impact of injections of energy from a generator at a point, and that could result in required network changes to the grid. So projects with lower distribution factors would have less of an impact to the grid and therefore would advance first to the study process. So as I said, projects will be selected in order of the lowest distribution factor. If project ties still exist after the use of the project's distribution factor, the tied projects would move to an auction. Next slide, please. The auction process is the final step for inclusion into the study process and would only apply to the projects that remain tied following the distribution factor tiebreaker. So at this point, the ISO would conduct a market clearing sealed bid auction for the right to be studied in a specific zone. We would request auction bids on a $1 per megawatt basis once the project scoring process and the distribution factor analysis is complete. And then we would rank and select projects for study based on the bid price, starting with the highest bid and progressing downward and ending with the project that exceeds the 150% megawatt capacity limit. Bidders would only submit the clearing price at risk auction financial security if they win the auction and proceed to be studied. And then the ISO would post the clearing price, but not the individual project bids on the ISO website for stakeholder transparency. Next slide, please. The auction revenues will go to network upgrades and will be in favor of the participating transmission owner. We're not contemplating any additional or new financial security instruments. They're the same as currently allowed for interconnection financial securities. And for successful auction participants, the ISO would refund the posted securities within 90 days of notifying the ISO of commercial operations. If a project withdraws that has participated in the auction, some or all of the auction posted security would be forfeited and then used to offset the cost of any still needed network upgrades. The ISO also proposed treatment of energy-only projects based on the identification of need in the resource portfolios. So for energy-only projects, there are two paths to interconnect. The first is the reimbursement option, which allows projects in energy-only projects in zones where the PUC or another local regulatory authority has identified the need for those energy-only projects. As the name implies, these projects would be eligible for reimbursement of the cost of the reliability network upgrade. And similar to how we would treat full capacity deliverability projects, the capacity would be studied and capped at 150% of the energy-only portfolio amount that was identified by the PUC or local regulatory authority. The other pathway is the non-reimbursement option, and this is for any energy-only resources that seek to connect in zones where the PUC's portfolio or local regulatory authority's portfolio has not identified the need for energy-only resources. These projects would not be eligible for reimbursement of reliability network upgrades, and there would be no cap on the number of projects that would be studied. It's worth noting at this point that there have been 0 energy-only projects submitted to the interconnection request process in clusters 10 to 15. So this is a relatively small issue for cluster 15 projects as we see it right now, but certainly something that the ISO will continue to watch to make sure that we're maintaining appropriate levels. I do think that the connection to the PUC portfolios and other resource planning is important here to make sure that everything that we're doing on energy only is within the construct that we've developed under the MOU. Next slide, please. Similar to the energy only pathway, the ISO is also proposing modifications to the merchant pathway. And the merchant pathway is important to ensure that projects that do want to interconnect outside of zones with available transmission capacity still have a path forward. So these projects will not have to compete for transmission plan deliverability allocations and will be eligible for the same cost recovery of posted financial security toward the cost of a local delivery network upgrade as the deliverability option projects or the projects in the transmission plan deliverability zones. In addition to this, we are proposing a commercial readiness deposit toward the cost of the area delivery network upgrade. And this is really just to ensure that the developer has confidence in the project's viability under the merchant option and isn't just using it as a pathway to find more information. We're also providing a pathway to be released from the merchant project's funding obligation if the PUC or other local regulatory authority identifies a need for that area delivery network upgrade in the future. The second piece of the interconnection process enhancements initiative is on contract and queue management and making sure that we're able to continue to process the projects that are currently sitting in the queue as cluster 14 and prior projects, and really trying to move those toward commercial operations, or if they're not moving toward commercial operations, to have a pathway to withdraw them from the queue. This set of changes includes updates to the limited operations study process. The ISO proposes to increase the amount of time that a project can submit a limited operations study to 9 months, which is currently 5 months, prior to synchronization. And the reason for adjusting this policy is to assist projects in knowing to what extent a project may synchronize to the grid, or whether it has to wait for completion of its assigned reliability network upgrades. We're also requiring the same practices for small synchronous generating facilities and inverter-based resources that we currently require for 20 megawatt and up inverter-based resources, and proposing some additional limitations on the ability to transfer transmission plan deliverability. Currently, what's happening is that projects in the queue are transferring deliverability to later queued projects, and then the project that transfers tends to languish in the queue and not advance to commercial operations. So with this proposal, the ISO is saying that the transferring project must then withdraw from the queue, so it can no longer hold up the projects that may be sitting behind it. The ISO is also proposing more stringent commercial viability criteria for projects in the queue and imposing a 7-year time in queue limit. Projects can stay in the queue beyond 7 years, but they have to meet annual demonstrations of commercial viability criteria. So this is similar to current practices, but we currently apply the commercial viability criteria to the ability to retain deliverability. Now we would just be applying those criteria to the ability to remain in the queue at all. And the ISO is also providing updates to the process for modification requests, because currently there is a lot of back and forth and email traffic on these items. And so we're proposing some opportunities to streamline the processing of modification requests. In addition, the ISO is proposing similarly timed financial security postings for projects that have shared network upgrades. So interconnection customers have raised concerns that the participating transmission owners are not meeting milestone dates, particularly with projects that have shared network upgrades or upgrades that are required by more than one interconnection project. And in some instances, PTOs are waiting until all or the majority of the interconnection customers responsible for the shared network upgrade have provided their notice to proceed. So the ISO has proposed better alignment of financial security postings for projects with these shared network upgrades in order to enable the upgrades to commence in a more timely manner. Similarly, once the PTO has received the notice to proceed and the third interconnection financial security posting from all of the impacted interconnection customers, the PTO will have 30 days to commence working on those upgrades. We propose a new deposit to the ISO to compensate the ISO for project management and new resource implementation for each project in the queue. This deposit will go only to ISO related processes. And importantly, the ISO will bill customers for this process rather than include it in the transmission access charge. And currently, generator interconnection agreements require an asynchronous generating facility to provide all phase angle measuring unit data at a resolution of 30 samples per second. And the ISO is now proposing to increase the amount of data that we can receive from inverter-based resources per unit of time. There are, despite the comprehensive work that has been done on both interconnection request intake and contract and queue management proposals, the ISO has a number of outstanding items that we propose to take to track 3 of the initiative this month, addressing some remaining issues. This includes how we allocate transmission plan deliverability. You may be aware that we currently use a number of different commercial viability indicators and do a little bit of scoring for transmission plan deliverability allocations. And we need to make sure that that process now aligns with the new scoring criteria that we're proposing as part of the interconnection request intake process. We're also going to be looking at the basis for providing or allocating interim deliverability to projects that are currently in the queue. And as a result of the volume that we saw in cluster 14, need to begin to look at the intra-cluster prioritization of projects in cluster 14. What we've seen is that there are so many projects that lead times for interconnections have been pushed out several years, in often case kind of to the lowest common denominator. And so we're looking at ways where we might be able to bring some of those cluster 14 projects online earlier based on the availability and the ease with which we can complete those network upgrades. So we are targeting the winter 2024 Board of Governors meeting to allow for implementation of these reforms in March 2025. And that's just for track 3. And I think it's important to note here too that the interconnection process enhancements are built upon the requirements of FERC Order 2023. The ISO has submitted its compliance filing with Order 2023 on May 16th, 2024, so just last week. And FERC has no obligation to rule on the ISO's compliance filing within a given time frame. So it's unclear when we'll hear back from FERC on that compliance filing. However, important to note that we did attempt to comply with almost every element of the proposal. So we managed to try to keep that simple and then build these interconnection process enhancements on top of that new set of requirements. And the ISO is proposing to re-engage with Cluster 15 in Q4 of this year, starting with October 1st, when we would allow interconnection customers to modify their interconnection requests for Cluster 15. I also want to flag that FERC granted the ISO permission to postpone Cluster 16 beyond 2024. So we will reopen Cluster 16 once we've processed all of the applications that move through in Cluster 15. As Neil mentioned, we did engage stakeholders in a very intensive working group process. We had 14 public working groups and stakeholder meetings with about 165 individuals attending each meeting, both virtually and in person. We produced 6 papers and received responses to 7 rounds of written comments from 62 different organizations. That number may still be climbing. So this has been a very intensive stakeholder process, and despite the various perspectives that have come to the table and participated in this initiative, I think we feel very confident that we've provided a very balanced proposal. But we do want to acknowledge some of the stakeholder responses that we've heard in terms of the final proposal. So next slide, please. I think the stakeholder responses that we heard from the final proposal reflect the magnitude of changes that the ISO is proposing here. In particular, we heard some confusion regarding the implementation of the zonal approach. That is something that is new, and we are working to clarify with stakeholders. But again, we do feel is relatively important to the underlying memorandum of understanding and our work with the agencies and local regulatory authorities. We are also hearing that the load-serving entities are broadly supportive of the proposal, though they have flagged some minor concerns and questions and things to monitor going forward. It's important to note here that a number of load-serving entities in both their letters and their comments on the final proposal and in public workshops have noted their intention to conduct open and fair processes in the LSE allocation process. And we expect that, given that those load-serving entities are regulated either by the Public Utilities Commission or by their local regulatory authorities, they would continue to follow normal codes of conduct and business practices in that process. At the same time, we've heard a number of developer concerns focusing on the scoring criteria, and particularly focusing on the influence that load-serving entities have in the commercial interest category. Here, it's really important to re-emphasize that the level of influence the load-serving entities have in the commercial interest category is really only 30%. That's the weight that we gave to the scoring process. And again, projects that advance to scoring will still study more than the necessary amount in that 150%. So there will be plenty of projects to compete once projects advance through the scoring process. We have also heard developers seeking assurances that LSE processes will be fair, clear, and open. And we have provided some guidance to that in an addendum that we posted on May 17th. So we do think that it's important that load-serving entities continue to follow their normal business practices and do create clear and fair and open, transparent processes, and are grateful to the Public Utilities Commission for their partnership in overseeing their procurement processes, as well as the local regulatory authorities as well. And we've heard concerns around the amount of load-serving entity-sponsored projects that can advance. Again, this is something that the ISO worked hard not to interfere with. I think California's landscape with utility ownership is very different than it is in other parts of the country. And we didn't want to disrupt current practices or trends around utility ownership. We still want to provide that pathway to utilities or load-serving entities to continue to develop their own projects, but not create a new incentive for that to occur more than it currently does. So we want to maintain levels of competition with this proposal. And the limits that are put in place are really relatively modest when you look at the math of all the weighting processes. And we've also heard concerns that project viability and the system need categories are not as granular or applicable to all projects. And to this, I think it's important to note that that's the reason that we have the load-serving entity scoring process, because It is very difficult to get very objective and clear scoring criteria that can apply to all different projects. But there are some factors that load serving entities are in a better position to assess than the ISO would be. And so that is why we lean on 30% of the scores coming from the load serving entities. We've also heard slight concerns that non-load serving entities are not held to the same, do not have the same opportunity to score projects as load serving entities. And I think I explained the rationale for this. It's something that we'll continue to monitor. We don't in any way want to preclude participation from non-load serving entities, but do want to make sure that we're prioritizing the needs to get resource adequacy projects built and ensuring that load serving entities have a pathway to commercial offtake with the studies, with the projects that come out of the study process. And we've also heard different concerns from load serving entities and developers around the energy only proposal. So load serving entities are concerned about the lack of a cap for projects in the non-reimbursable zones, and developers are concerned about the concept of having a non-reimbursable zone at all. So that's something that, again, we will continue to monitor, but for the relatively low volumes of energy only projects that we've seen in the queue for the past several years, it's something that I don't think should be an issue in cluster 15, but we will continue to watch for future clusters. And then fortunately, we've heard general support for the contract and queue management provisions that are included as part of this proposal, and think it's really important that we continue to move forward with some of those proposals going forward. So in response to some of these stakeholder proposals, I've mentioned this, or stakeholder responses rather, the ISO has posted an addendum to the final proposal. The first one was posted on May 9th. We posted a revised addendum to the final proposal on May 17th. And this included clarifications around our assessment of the zonal approach and available transmission plan deliverability. It also included some guidelines and expectations for the load serving entity allocation process, and additional information regarding utility-owned generation and energy-only projects based on some of the concerns that we heard. We held a stakeholder workshop on May 16th last week to discuss the addendum, the details of the zonal approach, and respond to any additional questions. We're still fielding those additional questions as they're coming in, and we provided a stakeholder matrix with the board materials. So this slide just outlines some of the recent actions the ISO has taken to respond to stakeholder feedback, and also importantly to note our FERC Order 2023 compliance filing, which was filed on May 16th. And to note, today's conversation is really an informational meeting, and we'll brief you again on June 12th for your consideration of this final proposal. In early June of 2024, the ISO will plan to initiate track 3 of the interconnection process enhancements. So it's clear to us, as Neil indicated and Elliot indicated earlier as well, that we do need transformational change in order to adapt to this increased demand for and competition for new generation. The final proposal prioritizes alignment with state and local resource plans, prioritizes transmission availability, procurement needs, and project readiness. And our queue management reforms will drive continued advancements of projects in the queue and provide clear authority for the ISO to withdraw any projects that are not moving forward. So the ISO will bring these reforms to you on June 12th of 2024. And I just really appreciate your attention to this very complex and comprehensive proposal, and do hope that you'll ask any questions to understand how it all fits together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, both substantial and substantive. I think we have our work cut out for us to work through this. Are there any further comments from the staff before I open it up to the board? No? Okay, then I will go ahead and try and watch the hands going up here. So Severin, I see yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Danielle, for that great presentation. As you talked about it, I realized there was one thing that I just not clued in on. So all this scoring is to rank for the study and basically to get above a cutoff line for the study. Does it matter for anything else? Does it matter either within the 150% that get taken? Does where you are in there matter? And does it matter for later in any sort of, I mean, what happens if we do the study and everybody passes and we're at 150%? Are we just assuming people will drop out? And yeah, that's a start. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So it does matter in terms of a gating item to get into the study process. However, the actual score that a project gets really only matters relative to the other scores that other projects gets to get into that 150% category. And then after the study process, the score isn't really a factor anymore. So it wouldn't inform any future decisions or steps in the interconnection process post the study.
Okay, that's great to know. So then you made this comment, which you and I sort of talked about earlier, that the LSE weight is only 30%, but in practice, what matters of how important it is how much variance there is in that versus the variance in the other two parts. And a number of the comments said there are going to be a lot of ties on the other things. And I know you don't think there may not be quite as many as some people suggest, but on the other hand, there's been this comment from CAISO and from others that there won't be enough points in total for everyone who clears the bar to have LSE points. That is, there will be a number of projects that will be taken that don't have LSE points. And then that makes me think that the LSE points won't make much difference on the margin because all that matters is getting above the bar. And so the last few projects that are jockeying to get above the bar, it's likely none of them will have LSE points. And that suggests that the LSE points really aren't pivotal in deciding whether you get in or not. And if that's the case, then we're sort of back to the discussion of all of the other points. And potentially, even though I think most people think the auction is a fourth fallback, it might actually end up playing more role than we previously discussed. I'm not sure there was a question. Well, there was sort of a question. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, I think it's fair. There are a couple, so there are a number of different gates that that the projects have to go through. The first gate is going to be informative, and that's whether they're behind a point of interconnection that has available capacity. So we'll give Cluster 15 projects an opportunity to check that and to modify their points of interconnection if necessary. And they should have the information that they need to understand whether they are or not. However, the availability of transmission capacity may be limited. And so if there's little transmission availability, that's going to reduce the number of projects that can advance to the scoring process at all, because it reduces the 150% number. So in that case, if there is a small amount of available transmission capacity, only a small amount of projects will advance. And the scoring process will be important because it's the only mechanism that we have other than the zonal process to determine which few projects do move forward through the study process. Now, within the scoring criteria, however, there are ways to get a good score without an LSE allocation. And so that gets to the weighting of the process where 70% of the projects can move forward essentially without an LSE allocation. It will depend on what every project brings to the table. But the factors of project viability and system need are more dependent on the type of project and not always applicable to every project that might be in the queue. Maybe with the exception of the engineering design plan, which every project should be able to bring to some degree to the process. So the LSE allocation process is going to be important in differentiating between those projects that may not have high points for project viability or system need, but may still be very good projects. And so it's those projects that will need to go out and start communicating with load serving entities to try to increase their score or to make sure that they receive a selection from the load serving entities. But
Okay, thank you. No, that actually gives me something to chew on and think about. Yeah.
okay, and then the last piece I want to emphasize based on your question is just if there continue to be a lot of ties, even if the load serving entities provide selections that result in kind of lumpy scores, then it would just mean that we would lean more heavily on the distribution factor and on the auction to differentiate which projects move forward into the study process.
And I want to say I am not an economist who thinks that everything should be allocated through markets, but I'm still unconvinced that an auction process at the top might not be better than this very complex approach. But I know not everyone's not getting everything they want, including me. Thank you.
Thanks, Severin. Mary?
Yeah, so I just wanted to thank Danielle. Congratulations on making your first board presentation. You did a great job. And I liked what you said about, wanting to create, continue to keep a level of competition going. And to Severin's questions, I'm going to come right back to this scoring as well. Based on the system need. Can you just expand a little bit more on projects that can provide local RA and then the long lead time resources? What's meant by those two things?
Sure.
And I
So
assume we're assigning that, CAISO.
yes, the ISO in coordination with the Public Utilities Commission and local regulatory authorities will be determining which projects get points in those areas. And I think it's important to mention that every project, in particular those that receive LSE allocations, should be aligned with system need, because that's sort of the basis of the memorandum of understanding, that we expect that all projects will be needed. That's the mark of a successful project from a developer's standpoint. But there were projects or types of projects that we felt important to prioritize in the system need category. And this is because we do need to focus on projects that can provide local resource adequacy and help us, ensure near-term reliability. So we felt it important to give them additional points. And at the same time, but in a very different circumstance, there are projects that are long lead time and may not be able to provide near-term local reliability, but may have a challenge getting a high point allocation in other areas and still need to be able to be in the queue to be studied so that they can come online under those long lead times that have been identified by the PUC or by local regulatory authorities. So
can you give an example, one of those?
Like an offshore wind project or a large pumped hydro project or something that will take a significant amount of time to develop and requires other infrastructure to be developed in the same time frame.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Danielle. Any other questions from the board? I suspect we have some folks who would now like to make comments. So Tegan, I'm going to turn it over to you to line them up and let's start.
All right, we'll go to the first caller in queue. Remember to click on that little pop-up so that you're unmuted. Luke Dunnington, you can go ahead and click on that little pop-up that has appeared, and that will allow you to be fully unmuted to make your comment.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Luke Dunnington, president, co-founder, Intersect Power. Our team is focused on investment and development in CAISO for the last 15 years. We're responsible for about 20% of what's operating in utility scale PV in CAISO, including about a gigawatt of PV and a gigawatt and a half hours of BESS currently. In the next couple of years, we will build over 2 gigawatts of PV and 4.5 gigawatt hours of BESS. And most importantly, we're pursuing about 8 gigawatts of PV and 12.5 gigawatt hours of BESS in QC15. Hence, the outcome of this initiative is of paramount importance to our company. We've been very active as a participant, both written and verbal commentary, as well as proactively meeting with staff and board members. Really want to commend CAISO staff for the efforts to wrangle stakeholder input on what is a very complex and divisive subject. We appreciate the thorough process that's been conducted. We believe reform is needed, and we are very supportive of higher viability barriers. We believe CAISO's project viability scoring criteria has amazing potential to be an effective tool. However, as currently conceived, our concern is the criteria lacks robust project viability indicators, providing little to no differentiation or insight into actual project advancement. Any scoring rubric needs to be both objectively verifiable and actually reflective of project advancement. The binding constraints in our business are dynamic. They are no longer offtake or tax equity, no longer the pinch points they once were. Our experience is that supply chain certainty of critical equipment is the predominant constraint and is the greatest determinant of project viability. Moreover, it's achievable for early stage projects like those entering the queue. Therefore, we strongly urge CAISO to incorporate project viability criteria for the following 3 items. 1, the procurement of key generator equipment, be they PV modules, batteries, wind turbine generators. 2, a preference for domestic supply of that key generation equipment. And then lastly, procurement of enabling high voltage equipment, for example, circuit breakers or main power GSUs. Now, we don't propose these because they are cheap or easy, nor do we propose them as a requirement, but rather because they offer differentiation, objective verification, and are a tangible reflection of true viability. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Luke. Appreciate those comments. Next up.
All right, we'll go to the next caller in queue.
Hi, this is Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I'm representing the Large Scale Solar Association today, and we have tried the association represents developers of a very, very large proportion of the projects in the queue. We've tried to do some consolidation here, so I hope you'll be a little patient with maybe 1 extra minute of comment, but we've tried to do that in the interest of making the comment process a little more efficient here. We did send a letter. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, you're quite welcome. We did send a letter in advance and well in advance. So what I'd like to do is just touch on a couple of the things in the letter and also a couple of things that have come up since we sent our letter well in advance. We have shared the common goals that the CAISO has in this process, including a long time support for clearing the queue of what is sometimes affectionately referred to as deadwood or non-viable projects. And we do understand the need for reducing the number of projects studied and the need and the consequent results to make sure that the study results are viable and realistic. We do have some concerns about some specific things in this proposal and feel like that certain elements need to be changed or at least worked on for more time. First, we are very concerned that fewer no cluster 15 projects will be accepted for study on the proposed TPD allocation zone rules, which are the most similar to the studies today, but will only apply where deliverability is currently available. So you saw the map with the zones up there before, and it's not that projects are in or out of zones. Some zones will have deliverability and many zones will not have available deliverability, and thus any projects in there will have to proceed in the merchant deliverability rules. And in particular, while the CAISO has released some information showing some deliverability in some of the zones, after the cluster 14 participation in the current TPD allocation cycle, we are very concerned that very few zones will have any deliverability left, and some or all of the cluster 15 projects will have to proceed under merchant deliverability rules. Now, those rules will require them to fund expensive upgrades without cost caps or reimbursement. And those rules are very similar to what the so-called Option B rules, which have been available for 20 years, but only a handful of projects have ever elected them, even though it comes with guaranteed deliverability status, because it's just too risky and expensive. And the additional ADNU deposit that would be required for this pathway would make it even more risky. So we strongly recommend that reconsideration of applying this framework to Cluster 15 if only a few of the 550 projects are accepted for study under the TPD allocation zone rules. It's important to assess whether accepting so few projects under these rules would undermine the state's progress toward clean energy goals or provide insufficient procurement competition to keep energy costs reliable or impair long-term reliability on the system. Second, we have very big concerns about the treatment of mixed fuel resources, such as solar storage combinations. And that, of course, is a particular focus for the Large Scale Solar Association. The rules, as now, are very unclear and still not fully baked. For example, a project that has solar capacity that will be under energy-only status or seeking energy-only status and storage capacity that is seeking deliverability apparently will be assessed under the TPD zone rules or have rules applicable to projects seeking deliverability, even if most of the capacity in the project is actually going to be energy only. So these rules are not fully baked. And after the last stakeholder meeting, the CAISO revised some rules in a second technical addendum, but to keep adding these addendums to the final proposal just basically is a sign that these rules need further development. These projects are a huge preponderance of the projects in Cluster 15, and these rules should not be developed on the fly. Third, the commercial interest scoring rate, and you will hear this, I know, from other developers, should be at least significantly reduced for Cluster 15. The commercial interest category is dominated, as we've just seen in this discussion, by load-serving entity points assigned to favored projects before any studies have been performed. And the rules would let LSEs choose their own projects or projects that far exceed their megawatt needs. These LSE preferences would count for nearly half the possible points achievable for most projects. So they would be determinative, we think, when Severin was talking about above-the-line projects. Many or most of the projects above the line in areas where there may still be deliverability will be, that in many cases, that position will be determined by the LSE preference points. While the proposal encourages, quote unquote, LSEs to implement equitable and transparent processes and provides guidance, there's no oversight yet of this LSE points allocation process by the CPUC or other regulators, and the points allocations will not be public. So LSE is very concerned about potential non-transparency, undue discrimination against not viable non-LSE projects, and violation of open access principles. We've already begun to hear of LSE seeking to extract concessions in advance from developers in return for this early points allocation, and we think the potential for abuse is obvious. Fourth, the reimbursement provisions for energy-only projects should be deferred for later consideration. These proposals first appeared for the first time in the final proposal. They were not proposed earlier or discussed in any of the earlier stakeholder process. And the two technical addenda to the final proposal still fail to resolve many key logistical and technical questions. So we feel that this needs more work, and that consideration of these proposals should be deferred. And finally, the eventual FERC tariff filings, this is more a process issue, should provide for severability of controversial issues instead of an all or nothing acceptance that would be required from FERC. So there are many issues that are still hotly disputed, as you're going to see, and interveners should have a chance to argue their positions on those issues without forcing FERC to accept or reject the whole filing. So that's the highlights. We have other concerns. Again, you have our letter that goes into more detail, but I would be very happy to answer any questions or address any issues that any of the board members may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. And we did receive your letter. Would any of the board members like to ask a question of Susan now? Severin, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Boy, you and Luke are really pushing me towards an auction would be a lot simpler than all of this.
I can see where you would think that.
Yeah. So first of all, on the deliverability issue, I'm getting a little confused about what is a technical issue of what deliverability is available versus what is an allocation problem. And because it sort of sounded like you were suggesting there isn't enough deliverability, so you should ignore deliverability. Or
well, the thing is, we don't know.
Okay.
I mean, with the deliverability results, the TPD allocation cycle ends at the end of this month. So we do not know yet what of all the zones that you saw up on that map, which zones are going to be D zones that have deliverability available, and which zones are going to be merchant deliverability zones that have none available and have to proceed under these more onerous rules. But we don't know yet if all of the zones could end up being merchant zones because all the deliverability has been absorbed by cluster 14, which is a very large cluster and is going through that process now, or if there will be some availability somewhere in some of the zones. We really don't know. We had a discussion about this at the last stakeholder meeting, and the CAISO said they were not too concerned if it looked like no zones had available deliverability. Well, then the scoring becomes less of an issue, obviously. But then you have all these much more onerous rules where you don't get reimbursed for ADNUs, which can be extremely expensive and long-lived, sometimes $1 billion. And most projects have not been able to bear that cost. And any additional deposit that would have to be put in for costly things like that would basically deter people from proceeding on that path as well.
So, but I guess I didn't really hear an answer. But if the deliverability is actually not available after cluster 14, I mean, that's a technical determination, not a process issue.
Well, it turns out to be both, because in areas where there is no deliverability, these merchant deliverability rules would apply. So you don't go through the scoring process, but you have to put in an additional deposit. You have to fund to stay in the queue under these rules. You will have to fund any ADNUs needed to provide deliverability in those areas because there isn't any available now.
Right.
And those ADNUs have tended to be very expensive. There's no reimbursement like there is for RNUs.
No, I get that, but what are you proposing instead?
Well, we're proposing that it's
ignore deliverability.
No, what we're proposing is before this proposal is adopted and implemented for cluster 15, that the CAISO first see if any zones are going to be TPD zones or if everyone is going to have to proceed under merchant deliverability. And if that leads to the decimation of cluster 15, I mean, if you have 550 projects, there is some room for that, of course. But that the CAISO at least give some thought, depending on what the results are, to how and in what way this would be applied to cluster 15. It's a transitional cluster. They didn't have a chance to do all this work with LSEs before they submitted applications. And so they should at least, instead of just blindly moving ahead and adopting this, they should wait and see what happens and think about it some more and reconsider it if there are no TPD zones, if everyone has to proceed under merchant rules that have never proven attractive over the last 20 years to hardly any projects.
Okay,
so it's more of a pause and a reconsideration, not to say ignore anything, but just think about whether that makes sense.
Yeah,
think about if you've only got 20 projects that are accepted for study, is that really an acceptable result?
Yeah, but I'm, as a board member and as a citizen of California, I'm worried about pausing. I'm worried about delay and I'm sure you are too.
Yes.
That this process has to come up with an imperfect solution, which will no doubt be imperfect, but it's got to move ahead.
That's true, but
you're saying we're tilting too far towards that.
What I'm saying is you should think about how it does move ahead. If it turns out that all these elaborate rules for the scoring and everything turn out to be totally irrelevant because there's no scoring, because there's no deliverability left, and you really should think about, does that mean you're going to lose 550 projects, some of which you might need and may be viable? So that's the issue that we're bringing out. So it's not so much a pause for like another 2 years. It's give some more thought to this, to whether this really makes sense for cluster 15 in particular, and how you might want to move ahead with it.
Okay, and then sorry to take up time, but these are thoughts, and I should have raised this with Luke, and if Luke wants to get back in line and comment on these things. I want to think through the LSE preference thing a little bit more, and I'm going to make a devil's argument here, and I'm going to say, just so nobody on the line thinks that Severin is advocating this, but I'm trying to think this through. What is wrong with LSE preferences, even if they are discriminatory? That is, these are companies that want to buy power, and they are they have their own process or organizations that want to. They have their own process for sorting that out, including doing it themselves, vertically integrating. Why should CAISO, wait, let me finish. Why should CAISO be in the business of getting in the middle of that decision, rather than if they, you know, saying, look, you get a certain amount of influence over which ones are going to be determined. So for instance, what if it wasn't transmission? What if there was transmission just wasn't an issue? Then the LSEs would be talking to the developers and making decisions about which developments they're interested in. And they would shut some out early on, and they would encourage others, or maybe some of them would say, we're not interested in any of you, we're doing it ourselves.
Okay. What the way
Okay.
that oh, sorry, I don't want to interrupt
No,
you.
no,
Go ahead.
okay, no, that's the
Okay.
idea. And I'd
Okay.
like a thought that isn't the law requires blah, blah, blah. I'd like
Yeah, no,
one,
I get it.
an efficiency of the system, or
Right.
suggested.
Well, we agree that LSEs have procurement oversight by their respective regulatory bodies. So we're not contesting the general process, or that some of this could take place before interconnection requests are submitted, which obviously for Cluster 15 did not happen because nobody knew that was happening over a year ago when those interconnection requests were submitted. There are no processes right now for overseeing points allocations this early in the process. Normally what would happen, the projects would go through studies. PPAs are not executed till later, and they're not required here either. But these interests, you know, the way that the LSEs would distinguish between proposals would be, they would be informed by study results, and they would know which projects have higher or lower upgrades, or cost upgrades. There's a least cost best fit process where they would select projects that, you know, basically credit projects that have lower interconnection costs and more advantageous locations. And so the idea here is they don't have that information now. And all these processes that might happen in the future where the regulators would provide guidance on how to do points allocations, none of that has happened here. So we're not saying that that can't work in the future. But if they have a suboptimal or discriminatory way of picking projects, then there are implications for ratepayer costs later down the road. Or perhaps they're picking projects that might not be as viable, and if there's discrimination or undue discrimination, and then project success might not be as assured as it would be if it was a fair and open process. So
Okay,
that's the reason for
let me push
fairness and
back just a
openness.
little bit. And again, I am not set on this view. Isn't that between the regulator and the LSE? If the regulator is, you know, you make that argument to the regulator, and the regulator says, you know, she's right. You guys, the LSE, really need to have a fair and open process in order to reach an efficient conclusion.
Well,
And
yeah, and if that dialogue happens sometime in the future before the interconnection requests are submitted, that might work. So we're not saying that doesn't work, or might not work, or couldn't work. That dialogue has not happened yet. There is no official guidance or any process or procedure, as far as we know, from the CPUC or others to decide or give guidance to or oversight of how this points allocation system is supposed to work. So the LSEs are pretty much on their own to decide what to do, you know, that they want. Not that they may not have to justify it later, that you know, that sort of thing, but there is what you're saying, that process you're saying could possibly work if that's the way it was, but it's not that way today.
I'm going to go ahead and intervene.
okay, thank you.
here.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Severin, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
Susan, I actually let that go because I think this is a fairly critical point that was addressed by a number of the commenters. I need to do a time check though, because we do have one other item on the agenda we need to get through. We were scheduled to close the open part of the meeting at 1. And so first, Tegan, can you tell me how many people do we have in line that still would like to make comments on this topic? I assume there's still a few.
There are 12.
Okay, and then the presentation that is scheduled on the briefing on summer loads, Elliot or Roger, do you have a sense of how long we need to go for that?
Well, I don't have a sense of how long it will actually take. We had planned for a half hour.
I think we can probably condense it down a little bit more than that. I think we
Okay,
should.
I'm going to ask you to start doing that. Mary, did you have a comment on this timing issue?
I have a comment on just wanting staff to answer Susan's question about projects being pushed into the merchant, but offline, and then copy us. I'd like to know the answer to her,
Okay.
her raising an issue about what's actually going to happen if we went with this formula, and have the staff respond.
I think that what I might as well put it out there now for the board's consideration. My thought today is that this is really in the almost like an open hearing for us all to get educated on what people are saying the issues are. I think we do need to have the opportunity for the staff to regroup and think about the submittals that people have made and the comments that are being made on the public record today, and then respond to us prior to the 12th of June, when we're supposed to actually be considering this for vote. I was going to go ahead and make one additional request, which is we've had a number of addendums to the original proposal. There may be more depending on what the staff's view is after listening to all the comments. If we could get kind of a consolidated proposal before the 12th so that we know what the current recommendation looks like, kind of all in one place, some sort of a summary. Elliot, would that be workable?
You'll have that well in advance of the 12th. We'll make sure.
Okay. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then we're gonna punch on here and get through the 12 people that are on the line and indicate to folks that if based on what you've heard today, you have additional written comments, would you please get them to us as quickly as possible so that then we could get those to the staff and let them respond so that we get get this package all in one big bundle for us before the 12th so we can know what we need to consider. So with that, Tegan, I'm going to turn it back to you and we'll keep punching through our list here.
All right, we'll go to the next caller in queue. Remember, click on that little pop-up to make sure you get unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. I'm Sushant Barve, Senior Director of Grid Integration with Clearway Energy Group. Clearway is one of the most experienced developers in California. We own and operate 5 gigawatt of generating capacity today on CAISO system. First up, we appreciate all the effort that has gone in from CAISO's policy team in developing this proposal over the last year, and for hearing input from stakeholders, and for making extra time for all the comments here. Clearway supports the principle of moving to a first ready, first serve model for entering the study process. However, we are concerned that the IPE proposal as it stands today is not ready to be implemented. We are especially concerned that elements of proposal could have serious negative impact on projects that are in late or advanced stage of development. Clearway agrees with the very important concern raised by LSA and others about the role of LSE interest in determining which projects advance in the study process, especially because LSEs will not have information about possible cost and timelines for any of these projects to interconnect. We also agree that the treatment of energy-only projects needs to be clarified. In addition to these, I would like to highlight 2 other concerns that we have discussed with CAISO staff, where some elements of the proposal would have a negative impact on late-stage development. First, while we generally support the commercial viability criteria requirement for older projects in the queue that are not making any progress, these requirements need to be adjusted in case where projects are subject to interconnection delays. Unfortunately, several of our projects have been subject to these interconnection delays in very late stage of development after making full security postings that are 100% at risk. If a project is subject to multi-year interconnection delays, it is likely to lose its PPA, and it may take many years to renegotiate a new contract. In the current IPE proposal, a project in this position could be kicked out of the interconnection queue due to an interconnection delay that's beyond its control. This needs to be corrected. And second, we believe that the additional $100,000 implementation deposit for CAISO's new resource implementation and queue management should not retroactively apply to projects that have already executed LGIAs. We hope that these comments of elements of the proposal can be modified to avoid a negative impact on late stage development and are needed for system reliability in coming years. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Just a quick question. So Shashank, basically the concern here, which would really be devastating to a project, is that a late stage project that already has an interconnection agreement could lose it. And has a PPA, could lose it.
Could lose it, and we have had
due to circumstances not under your control or outside of your control.
right, and this ties to a specific provision on at what point of time which cluster has to show commercial viability criteria. That's the part of the proposal where we are highlighting that issue.
That is something we would need to look at. That is pretty serious. Okay, thank you for flagging that for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
All right, we'll go to the next caller in queue.
Good afternoon. I'm Jared Ferguson with the California Public Utilities Commission Energy Division, and I lead our work on the development and mapping of PUC resource portfolios for the ISO's annual TPP. I'd like to thank Chair Shorey and the board for the opportunity to speak at today's meeting. Echoing what has been submitted in a letter from CPUC's President Reynolds, CPUC staff greatly appreciate the over a year-long effort by the ISO and the commitment of ISO staff to engage stakeholders and develop this interconnection process enhancements proposal. Throughout the initiative, CPUC staff have been actively engaged in the workshops and comments, voicing support for the initiative's overall goals and collaborating with the ISO to refine the proposed reforms to ensure the interconnection process better aligns with the CPUC's planning and procurement efforts. We support the ISO's continuing work to implement the 2022 Memorandum of Understanding among the CPUC Energy Commission and ISO. CPUC staff appreciate the connection of these reforms with the 2022 MOU and their planned role in helping to accelerate development and deployment of critical energy resources. I want to highlight in particular our strong support for the proposal's effort to engage load-serving entities to directly indicate interests in projects, which includes precautions to prevent preferential treatment of LSE-owned resources. We appreciate this innovative way to ensure that the reforms are aligned with the resource procurement needs, a key part of the MOU. We also appreciate the proposed zonal approach, the supporting heat map, as well as the scoring prioritization of long lead time resources in line with the transmitted portfolios for the TPP. These efforts will help consolidate information to help inform market participants, strengthen the alignment between resource and transmission planning and the interconnection process, and also help ensure new resources can come online in time to help meet the state policy goals. I just want to thank again the ISO for the hard work that their staff have put into developing this proposal, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Jared, very much. We continue to work very closely with you as well as the Energy Commission to assure that all of our efforts are aligned, so we appreciate those comments today. If it's okay with the board, I think I'm just going to punch on through the commenters at this point. If you have a burning question, go ahead and put your hand up, but I'm just going to go ahead and let the commenters go. So we'll take the next person. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
We can.
Thank you very much. Good morning, or I should say afternoon at this point, Chair Shorey and Board of Governors. My name is Chris Devon, Director of Energy Market Policy, representing Terra-Gen. We appreciate the opportunity to provide comments on the 2023 Interconnection Process Enhancements final proposal. Terra-Gen is a leader in the clean energy sector and one of the largest renewable and storage developers in the US and California. We have successfully developed several large-scale renewable and storage projects here, including the Edward Sanborn project, which is located in Kern County and is currently the largest hybrid solar plus storage project in the world. We recognize CAISO's attempt to build consensus during the stakeholder process. However, we believe the proposal is flawed. It places too much power over the decisions for advancing new projects for interconnection study with load-serving entities and outside of the hands of independent developers like Terra-Gen. We believe that the CAISO's proposal will discourage competition at the early stages of development and also undermines FERC open access principles. We respectfully request that the Board of Governors direct CAISO management to make changes to address our concerns as follows. TerraGen is most concerned with the scoring criteria aspect of the proposal, and specifically the commercial interest category, which may result in an over-reliance in prioritizing projects based on LSC point allocations. We believe that this will limit the study of cost-effective projects that are well-positioned to help meet California's goals towards reducing electric generation sector emissions. While we do not oppose a prioritization mechanism that is equitable to all parties, we believe this proposal is not equitable. TerraGen requests that the scoring criteria element be eliminated from application to cluster 15. CAISO's proposal and the addendums posted indicate that LSCs would need to adopt equitable and transparent procedures for assessing and selecting projects for point allocations prior to the submission of interconnection requests. However, this critical step was not undertaken prior to cluster 15. Therefore, we believe it should not be applied to cluster 15. The proposal will also result in LSCs picking winners and losers based on limited information on projects' true costs and viability at the earliest stage of development, even before permitting. The commercial interest category is dominated by LSC points assignments for projects at a very early stage before any studies have been performed. And the points for this category account for most of the possible points achievable for most common types of projects in the queue, including most solar projects. This is likely to be the main determinant of which projects are studied, even with CAISO's proposed weighting. CAISO's proposal has also relaxed protections around LSC-sponsored projects, providing LSC special privileges to select their own self-build projects in disproportion to their requirements, while restricting non-LSC commercial interest to selections of only a single project per cluster. TerraGen opposes the limitations around non-LSC interest in the scoring criteria. TerraGen also has additional concerns about other elements of the CAISO's proposal related to the zonal approach, particularly the treatment of projects in TPD allocation zones and those located in merchant deliverability zones, potentially resulting in inequitable outcomes, as well as the proposed treatment of the reimbursement provisions for energy-only projects that was included only in the first time in the final proposal. We also have had some more recent concerns related to the treatment of mixed fuel, hybrid, and co-located resources. We will plan to submit a letter to the board outlining these items in more detail. Lastly, given these concerns, TerraGen believes that CAISO's Terra filing should include severable treatment for these controversial intake request screening elements. Thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, let's go ahead to the next person.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's Nancy Rader with the California Wind Energy Association. CalWIA understands that an interconnection queue containing hundreds of projects creates an untenable situation for CAISO staff because it's nearly impossible to timely conduct interconnection studies for so many customers. So we do support substantial reform, but we oppose staff's proposal. We and others have proposed effective reforms that would create far less damage to open access, but staff essentially ignored these proposals. Let's first appreciate that most of the capacity in queue is battery storage, with only a portion of queue positions held by the renewable energy resources that are needed to charge that storage, and only a relative handful are held by location-constrained resources such as onshore wind, geothermal, and non-battery storage, of which there's 11 gigawatts in the PUC's new plan. And it's important to note that the PUC is still in the process of defining what long lead time resources are. And in any case, it identifies these resources based on a very high-level resource analysis. Staff proposes to limit FCDS applications to very few specific areas where pre-existing studies show that there is available deliverability capacity. There are three big problems with that approach. First, that information will drive up land values in the identified areas. There's already evidence of that. Second, those studies will be based on dated, incomplete information. And third, these areas are rarely where location-constrained resources can be developed. So right off the bat, location-constrained resources will be excluded from the so-called open access process, even where location-constrained resources can enter the queue, the colossal non-refundable financial commitments that developers must make on the basis of shaky studies will be prohibitive for all but the very largest companies. Projects that are allowed to enter the queue in limited areas will do so based in large part on scoring by load serving entities, but that scoring will not be based on the information that is most critical to project success, namely transmission cost and transmission timeline. Without this objective information, scoring will be arbitrary and non-transparent, so it will be difficult even for the PUC to determine if LSCs are favoring their own projects. And then there's a good chance that many of the projects that do qualify for meaningful studies will find out that they're in a very different situation than was portrayed by the dated studies they relied on. These realized risks could further chill the market. In a nutshell, the proposed reforms would destroy open access, decimate competition, and raise costs for ratepayers. And there's a better way to approach the problem than to slash the size of the superclusters up front in a crude way. Instead, staff could conduct or have consultants conduct studies for a reasonable fraction of capacity at all the POIs where there are interconnection applications. That would provide meaningful information for project scoring by LSCs, and it would allow promising projects that best serve the state's resource needs to be studied. Staff never seriously entertained that approach, but we hope that the board will advise it to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I don't see any questions, so I'll go ahead. Next person. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Shorty, Vice Chair Bornstein, and CAISO Board Governors. I'm Fernando Cornejo from SCE, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the CAISO's final proposal in the 2023 initiative on the agenda today for the briefing purposes. Following an extensive stakeholder process, the final proposal sets forth essential revisions to the CAISO's current interconnection procedures in support of California's clean energy goals. SCE therefore supports the final proposal, which reflects a reasonable balance of perspectives among the broad set of stakeholders. Specifically, SCE believes having commercial interests as a key indicator of a generating resource's commercial viability at the interconnection request intake process results in greater efficiency regarding the projects which will proceed to the technical study process and are ultimately procured by load-serving entities. Regarding the LSC point allocation process, in the case of SCE, the CPUC has regulatory oversight of our procurement activities, which includes a transparent process to ensure there is no preferential treatment. To achieve a fair and consistent LSC allocation process, SCE believes the criteria and description regarding on what basis an LSC will allocate capacity/points should be governed by the local regulatory agency and not be included as an element of the CAISO's IEP. SCE would like to thank the CAISO Board of Governors and CAISO staff for the opportunity to present SCE's perspective on the 2023 IEP Track 2, and I welcome any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Fernando, anybody have any questions? Okay, next.
Good morning, Board of Governors. Don Trethway from the California Energy Storage Alliance. Since we provided written comments, I will keep my remarks extremely brief in the interest of time. I think we step back, the scoring criteria should really focus on the actions a developer can take to demonstrate to the CAISO that its project is of higher quality than other projects and thus should be studied. And so if we look at the 100 points, which is the maximum someone could achieve, 52.5 of those are what I would call binary points. You're in the local area or you're not in the local area. So there's not a lot of action you can take to demonstrate and differentiate yourself except for where you were located. Then you give 30 points to the load serving entities, and that leaves then 17.5 points that can be achieved by the developer by simply attesting that their engineering design is 50% complete, which I would expect every developer will meet that and receive those 17.5 points, which is why we're left with the 30 points that the LSC can allocate, and what actions can the developer take to get a hold of those 30 points. And that hasn't been discussed widely and how that's actually going to occur for cluster 15. Thanks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Don. Any questions? Okay, next.
Good afternoon, Board of Governors. My name is Caitlin Leoteris. I'm a consultant here today representing American Clean Power California, or ACP California. We represent companies who develop, own, and operate utility scale storage, solar, geothermal, land-based wind, offshore wind, and transmission assets. So the whole gamut in California and across the West. We represent a diverse range of members, and as might be expected with reforms of this magnitude, each member has a slightly different position on the final proposal to reform the CAISO interconnection queue. While our members may have different perspectives, they all recognize the urgency and importance of taking on these reforms. Developing interconnection procedures that allow the process to proceed in a timely and predictable manner is an essential component of California's clean energy transition. And given the scale of challenges experienced in recent clusters, the changes have to be significant to be effective. So first and foremost, we want to acknowledge the Herculean efforts that CAISO staff has invested to make the process highly collaborative and responsive to stakeholder feedback. Throughout the process, CAISO has worked with stakeholders to answer questions, provide clarification, and provide additional guidance to address lingering concerns, including through the addendums that have been released recently. Despite these efforts, we do want to highlight a few areas of concern that merit ongoing monitoring and evaluation. First, as you've heard about today, having LSEs allocate commercial interest to projects this early in the development process is a novel and untested approach. And we're cognizant that this approach, if not implemented appropriately, could serve to discriminate against projects proposed by independent power producers. We appreciate that CAISO has provided recommendations and guidelines to LSEs regarding how they should allocate these points in the addendum. And while we appreciate that guidance, we do request that CAISO formally commit to ongoing monitoring of this process should it go forward, and to continuing to work with the development community toward the creation of additional scoring criteria that developers have more control over. Second, we have concerns around LSE's ability to self-allocate commercial interest to their own projects. And we urge CAISO to commit at a minimum to evaluating this process and possibly tightening the policy after the first cluster cycle under the new rules. Conversely, while we appreciate the pathway that CAISO has provided for non-LSE off-takers, so corporate off-takers, to express commercial interest, we are concerned with the limitation that these projects can, or these off-takers can only express interest in one project per cycle. So we'd request that CAISO remove that restriction and monitor the process going forward to determine if this does actually result in the quote crowding out concern that you've heard expressed. So in conclusion, ACP California generally supports the objectives and direction of the IPE 2023 final proposal, but we do request the board and CAISO's attention to these ongoing concerns, which at a minimum need to be monitored as the process moves towards implementation. Thank you for considering these points.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Appreciate those comments. Any questions? Okay, next.
Hello, Matthew Plummer from Pacific Gas and Electric Company. I'll try and help you regain some time. PG&E supports the Track 2 reforms and encourages you to adopt them when you reconvene in June. Our support is based on a simple assessment. Today, the status quo is unacceptable. We have to act. You've heard today two things: go slower and do less. I don't think we're going to get a better proposal if we just wait a couple more months. You've heard a broad expression of different ideas. I think staff have done their best to navigate those and have put forward a proposal that's going to improve the process. And given the current crisis, we simply can't wait. So we encourage you to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Questions? Okay, next.
Hello, this is Ed Smeloff again. Good afternoon, Chair Shorey. Again, I'm representing the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies, and CERT encourages the Board of Governors to move forward expeditiously in adopting the interconnection process enhancement proposal. This proposal is very much needed, and maybe it's not perfect, but it does advance the process so that we can conduct, you can conduct the interconnection cluster studies that are necessary, particularly for cluster 15. We've heard from parties about the viability issue. We think that the load serving entities have an obligation to do their own due diligence and determine the viability of project, perhaps above and beyond the scoring system that the CAISO is using. Likewise, the developers, if there's, should be able to present their value propositions and the benefits of their projects directly to the load serving entities. So we think the process is fair and balanced. There may still be some details related to hybrid projects and co-located projects that your staff needs to work out, but we think there's no need for further delay and that we would encourage the board to advance the proposal and to prepare for adoption at your June 12th meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. Okay, no questions. Next.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
We can.
Thank you, board. Appreciate your time. My name is Shane O'Brien. I'm Vice President of Transmission with HIPAA Power. I will keep my comments brief today, as we have also submitted comments in writing for you to consider. To summarize the comments that we've made, first and foremost, we believe that the zonal approach as currently proposed is fundamentally flawed and requires further refinement to provide a meaningful and certain result. The zonal approach seeks to use data from previously conducted deliverability studies on earlier queue clusters to limit the participation of future interconnection projects. The same data will not be used to evaluate and award deliverability service during the study process. Looking at cluster 14 as an example, they're currently being evaluated for deliverability based on capacity that has been added to the system through TPP plans that have been approved in the last 3 years since cluster 14 applied to the queue. It's also important to remember that cluster 14 can still seek deliverability service next year as well. From our standpoint, it doesn't make sense to have this huge disconnect between the data and the models and the information that will be used to limit projects participating in the process from the beginning and then later to award projects for service. We believe that this will result in projects that are evaluated in zones that essentially do not have capacity available, while other zones that were screened out in the beginning of the process may have capacity added in later TPP cycles that do not have any projects to award to, even if there's capacity available in those zones. Secondly, with the scoring proposal, we believe that this essentially raises the floor on the minimum requirements, even though there isn't a bright line requirement. We believe that the LSC interest points will be a key differentiator in the scoring process. And the concern we have with this is not what LSCs are being tasked to do, but the fact that they're being tasked to make decisions with little to no data and no certainty of the data, as the study that they are being asked to select projects for has not actually occurred yet. Today in the current TPD award process, when LSCs are providing information to either contract projects or to shortlist projects, they at least have study results that are available that give them some certainty as to the cost and timing of those projects. With a proposal, this is no longer available to them. With the auction mechanism that's being proposed as a tiebreaker, we see this as an inefficient way of adding cost to developing projects without providing a clear benefit to the CAISO market or ratepayers. And the administration and cost of this process will add cost to all projects. Finally, we are concerned that CAISO has dismissed early and frequent developer proposals to restructure, streamline, and automate the interconnection study process and business practices They had committed to revisiting, including this in a more comprehensive proposal later on in the process, but they have failed to do so with their final proposal. Thank you for consideration of these comments.
Thank you, Shane. Any questions? All right, next up.
All right, we're going to go to the final comment in the queue.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Shorey and Governors. Mike Florio with Florio Consulting. I have a technical question that relates to a number of the comments that have been made earlier. CAISO has posted on this initiative webpage, some very detailed tables that show the amount of TPD available at each point of connection, point of interconnection, and all the constraints that might impact a project that wants to interconnect at each of those points. It's very good information, but what's not clear is how that information may change before we get to cluster 15. Susan Schneider pointed out that TPD allocations for cluster 14 will eat up some of that, and I assume the transmission plan that was approved earlier in this meeting will add deliverability at some points. And my question is, will those tables be updated sometime later this year and before cluster 15 kicks off, so that both developers and load serving entities can see how much TPD is really going to be available at these different points?
Good. Thank you very much, Mike. I don't know if you want to, anybody on the staff wants to respond to that now or respond separately.
Yeah, it's Jeff here. The answer to the question is yes, we will be updating after the 2024 TPD allocation, which will be, the reports are in, say, mid-June. I think we're looking at either kind of in the August time period to update and provide that information out.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, last chance. We're about to close down the public comments on this item for today.
All right, we do have one person has just jumped into the queue.
All right, one more, you're it.
Hi, thank you so much. I'll keep my comments very brief. My name is Brandon Green. I'm with Qcells USA. We're a solar developer out of Irvine. So first I want to thank the CAISO staff for all the work they put into developing this. This is my first time engaged in CAISO stakeholder process, and it was good. Appreciate the cadence of the meetings and the detailed write-ups after each iteration of the process that helped to stay really engaged with a very complex topic. So I understand the challenges that CAISO faces with massive queues and limited capacity and the need to absolutely do something. However, as presented, the IPE creates too much uncertainty and an unlevel playing field for developers. So big concerns with the scoring criteria. We see the LLC interest is far too heavily weighted, especially compared to non-LLC interest. When you look at the other criteria, such as project viability and system need, even if those are scored without the LLC interest, it will be difficult for a project to move forward in the study process. Tack onto that the zonal approach with the 150% constraint criteria, adding another level of uncertainty as projects are placed in order of scoring behind a constraint until that capacity is met. It's then closed to remaining projects that didn't meet the cutoff. So at the end of the day, the IPE proposal presents just too much risk for developers. I can easily see a situation where a developer has put significant investment into a viable project, secured land for site control, did their due diligence by looking at the data that was provided to look at the available capacity, and still never even make it to the interconnection study process. So I would encourage the board to take a long look at this proposal, and for the CAISO staff to continue to work with the industry on refining this proposal as we're quickly moving towards cluster 15 and looking forward to cluster 16 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And Elliot, I just wanted to talk with you a little bit about what the expectations will be going forward. We know that this will come back to the full board on the 12th of June. I would like to formally request that for all of the people who would like to submit any additional information to the board in terms of letters, could we, I know this is a little bit short timing, but I also recognize that you all have been working very hard on this issue for a long time. So I'd like to ask that all written submittals be received no later than next Wednesday in order to give then the staff some time to review them, the board to be able to review them, the staff to get organized to respond to any questions, concerns, or comments that people would like to make. So next Wednesday, I'm trying to look at the calendar here, I think it's the 29th. I recognize Monday is Memorial Day. I was going to pick Tuesday, but I thought that was kind of unfair. So we'll go with Wednesday. Get your written submittals to us. And then at that point, Elliot, we'll turn it over to you and the staff to put together your last, best, and final, as they like to say, offer for us to consider on June 12th. And I suspect we'll be hearing from a lot of folks again, but we're on a good path here. This is a bit of a long road. It's been going for a year, and it's got a little bit further to go to get there, but it's very important. And I did hear consensus from everyone that we need to do something. So we are going to do something. We're going to figure out what that is on June 12th. And Elliot, did you have any other comments you want to make on that? In terms of
No, that sounds like an excellent path forward. Consider it done, and we look forward to the follow-up meeting in June. And thanks.
Okay.
I also just want to express my appreciation to everybody that made comments today. Very thoughtful. We really appreciate all the perspectives and look forward to bringing this issue to a good resolution on June 12th. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Everybody, hang on. We're close to lunch, but we've got one more item to handle today, the summer loads and resource assessment. So I'll turn it over to, I'm trying to,
actually,
it's back to Neil again.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the good news is this is the last item.
Okay.
But today I do want to introduce Aditya Jayaprabhakar, who joined our group about a year ago in the key role of Director, Resource Assessment and Planning. Aditya has taken on coalescing and centralizing our resource assessment activities, not only for the summer assessment work, but our work underpinning our collaboration on resource adequacy assessments and integrated resource planning. So the broader spectrum of resource assessment activities is now being centralized in our group under Aditya. And we really appreciated having him on board with that work, as we also work to standardize the practices between those different work streams so that we're using consistent methodologies and assumptions and processes as we move forward. So this is also Aditya's first opportunity to present to the board. I think he's already heard we will be trying to keep the presentation as short and tight as possible. So he'll be hitting the high points, but we'll also be keen to respond to any questions you have or any follow-up questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aditya. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Board of Governors. Excited to be here. Next slide, please. A quick review of last year. Last year was a good year. Next slide. How does 2024 look? We have, the system has added about 4,500 megawatts of capacity through April 1st, and we anticipate an additional 4,500 megawatts of new resources to be added to the grid by June 30th. That's a total 9,000 megawatts of expected or online resources by September 1st. We have a significant amount of new resource additions. The latest adopted CEC forecast shows a July peak and 2 hours forward compared to our previous forecasts of September and our ending 20. We have average to moderately average, above average hydro conditions being forecasted for the year, and a good chance of above normal temperatures June through August, and increased chances of heat waves in August and September. That kind of sums up our 2024 outlook. The next slide, please. These gains are demonstrated both in our both metrics of measurement that the ISO uses to assess summer preparedness. One is a probabilistic assessment. Because we don't know what the summer is going to look like, we run through 500 different simulations of the system, 8760 cases, profiles, where we look at unique profiles for wind, solar, load, and outage profiles, and then run the system. The analysis shows some certain number of cases with unserved energy. There is a planning target that says 1 in 10 years, you can have an unserved energy event. In this 500 simulations, that is mimicking 500 years. They could be 50 cases with unserved energy. And looking at the number of cases that showed unserved energy was very less, which means we have a surplus amount of capacity in the system. That indicated about 2,550 megawatts of surplus above and what is needed to meet the target. That's the probabilistic view. And on the right-hand side, we show a simple stack analysis that has been improved since the last year, where we were only focusing on the peak hour. Now we do a multi-hour stack view. And for the projected, next slide, please. We can move to the next one. As you can see in the zoomed in view, the dashed line is the load forecast. The line above it is the load forecast plus 18.5% reserve margin that is required. That is the ISO uses to assess resource sufficiency. And then, as you can see, you have at least or more in all of the hours that are shown here. We have a surplus of 3,500 megawatts available in the net peak hours. Energy storage resources are assumed to be dispatched in the hours most needed, but otherwise you can see that most of these there is sufficient capacity available in a 1 in 2 kind of a load forecast scenario. Next slide. When I said unserved energy events in the probabilistic assessment, it basically means you get into the emergency system operations. And then there is, we have a good amount of surplus capacity in the emergency resource category, about 3,500 megawatts this year. Most of that is coming from the ESS RRP program, which has about 2,859 megawatts of resources, and the other programs collectively provide an additional cushion of 3,500 megawatts. Next slide, please. The weather forecast guidance shows increased chance of above normal temperatures across interior California, lower chances for coastal California. As I mentioned earlier, increased heat waves in September and August are forecasted. Next slide. So all in all, the 2024 summer loads and resources assessment is showing a positive outlook for summer, driven by resource additions, average hydro conditions, softening of the load forecast, more than offsets the shift once through cooling resources that moved into strategic reserves, and also a resource that has retired. So while the positive outlook is promising, extreme drought, wildfires, and continued potential for widespread heat events and other disruptions continue to pose a risk for emergency conditions to the ISO grid. We work with our state partners in operation and sequencing strategic reserves and emergency programs for this summer as we continue to monitor the system conditions as they present themselves. So with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. That was an excellent presentation. Very compressed, but very important points that you're making. And really, I have to say, this is very encouraging. It means we're making steadily good progress to address the key issues that we've been confronting with respect to summer reliability. Do any of the board members have any questions?
I actually do have one.
Go ahead, Severin.
Thank you, Aditya. That was very interesting and good. If you go back to the slide that you focused on with the hour by hour stack graph, the average imports looks like it's just a constant in that graph. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. We use a constant import in the stack model, but when we do probabilistic assessments, we use higher imports for like we use 5,500 megawatt of imports for hours 16 through 22, and then 11,000 in the other hours. So yeah,
And-
this is
and
basically showing
What's
average.
the forecast for those imports, which depends on what the rest of the West has available for us?
Yeah, this is coming from what is the average imports that we have seen in September historically. And that
So-
changes by month.
Okay, so we don't do any sort of forward-looking forecast the way we do with many of these other categories for import.
Not yet. Yeah, that's the plan for next year.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the board? Okay, the last item on our agenda is the informational reports that we receive at every meeting. Did anyone have any questions on any of the informational reports that are in the board package? All right, I am looking at my watch and I have about 1:26, so I'm going to ask the board members to reconvene for our closed session at 5 minutes to 2. And to all of you who've attended today's meeting, we really appreciate all of the comments, all of the hard work that went into the presentations that we received. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again, on most of you anyway, I suspect, on June 12th. And with that, I'd like to declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Intel or Events. You may now disconnect.